A luxury jet on its maiden voyage is jolted in midair.
Declare an emergency. We have a wingtip!
The plane has lost part of its wing.
It became clear that we were in very, very big trouble.
The crew struggles to land the badly damaged plane.
November 600, X-ray Lima, declare an emergency.
But the trouble isn't over when they hit the ground. The crew is detained and questioned by police. Somehow, this small plane has triggered the worst crisis in Brazilian aviation history. September the 29th, 2006, in São José dos Campos, Brazil.
3, 2, 1!
It's a big day at Embraer headquarters. The Brazilian aviation firm has just sold a brand new private jet to XLR, a US charter company. The price tag, $25 million.
It's a beautiful airplane, and there was a beautiful little ceremony that Embraer had in the hangar just before we got on the plane. And the guys from XLR were particularly proud.
The Legacy is a modified regional jet. The cabin redesigned for comfort. It can seat up to 13 people. And in its first 4 years of service, Embraer has delivered almost 100 of these sleek business jets. XLR will use the jet to fly customers around the world. But first, the company has to get the plane up to the United States. Joseph Lepore and Jan Palladino will be at the controls for the jet's maiden voyage. They've been down in Brazil for a couple of weeks, getting familiar with the new plane. Joe Sharkey is a reporter for the New York Times. He's been offered a free ride home.
We were delivering an airplane, basically, and my role was hitchhiker, and they kindly invited me along.
The Legacy jet is heading to Manaus in northern Brazil, a stopover on its way to New York. Half an hour after takeoff, the Legacy is flying over the heart of Brazil. The countryside stretches out below. The view out of the window is spectacular.
I glanced out and I was amazed. Just to the horizon, nothing but treetops. And I just remember how pretty it seemed.
At 10 minutes to 4 in the afternoon, the Legacy jet makes contact with controllers at the Brasilia Area Control Center, still nearly 100 kilometers away.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima, flight level 370, good afternoon.
CA 229, raise altitude 3952, raise altitude 329. Coming in, raise altitude. Yes, roger.
75% of the country's air traffic is handled by the controllers in this room.
The traffic volume is larger than in any other control center in the country.
One of the many planes they'll be dealing with today is the Legacy jet. Every flight that's handled by Brasilia ACC appears on computer screens as a small circle moving in the direction of the plane. The computer also displays the plane's actual and planned altitudes.
November 600 X-ray Lima. Stock ident.
Roger.
Palladino sends out a signal. Controllers use it to confirm that the data on their screen is coming from the plane they think it is.
Radar surveillance.
An hour later, the flight has settled into a familiar routine.
Mood sort of settled down, everybody was working, and it was just a very, very calm and peaceful time. I was transcribing notes from one of the interviews from the Embraer tour.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
But in the cockpit, Palladino is having trouble getting back in touch with air traffic controllers in Brasilia.
Brasilia, November 600, X-ray Lima.
He can't raise controllers on the frequency he used almost an hour ago. He tries other channels.
Brasilia, November 600, X-ray Lima. Brasilia, November 600, X-ray Lima.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
After 12 attempts, Palladino finally gets in touch with Brasilia ACC, this time with a different controller who provides radio frequencies for future contact.
Contact 123.32. 26.5.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last two. Sorry, say frequency one more time for November 600, X-ray Lima.
The Legacy loses radio contact again.
Brasilia, November 600, X-ray Lima.
As the pilots try to restore communication with Brasilia, the plane continues to power through the sky. It's just minutes before 5 o'clock.
Suddenly, there was the loudest bang I've ever heard in my life. The concussion itself seemed to affect every atom in my body.
What the hell was that?
Just fly the airplane, dude.
They're an emergency. Sit down back there.
No one's sure what's happened to the jet. But when Joe Sharkey looks out of the window, he's stunned by what he sees.
The end of the wing was chopped off and it was serrated. It looked like it had been chewed off. It became clear that we were in very, very big trouble.
XLR Vice President Ralph Micheli rushes to the window for a look at the damage.
I said to Ralph, "How bad is it?" And he looked at me and he said, "It's bad."
With more experience flying this type of plane, co-pilot Palladino takes over control of the limping jet.
Just let me fly the thing, dude. All right? We're descending. I want to get down.
Okay, it's yours.
The crew still can't make contact with controllers.
November 600, X-ray Lima, declaring an emergency. Do we have a wingtip? No! Damn it.
The entire tip of the Legacy's wing is breaking up. That affects airflow and is making the plane hard to control.
Yeah, you doing okay?
As the plane begins to descend, passengers in the back are worried that the damaged wing is getting worse.
Our main concern was that wing, but it had taken such a hit that the structural integrity of the wing was obviously in question. The leading edge was separating.
With so much damage to the wing, the pilots can't turn sharply. Too much stress could rip the wing right off.
We were in a position where we realized we were going to die. I thought of my wife, and I thought, well, okay, one thing I can do is I can write a note to my wife, which I did. I took out my reporter's notebook, and I wrote, a short note saying that I loved her and that, just saying what I could.
The Amazon is a bad place to have to land a plane. It's a dense jungle for as far as the eye can see.
There's nothing down there but trees. And I thought, where are they going to put this airplane down?
Damn it. Just hours into its maiden voyage, the badly damaged jet is going down. Palladino and Lepore's flying will soon be analyzed and debated throughout Brazil. The verdict against them will be harsh.
Please answer, November 600, X-ray Lima.
The crew of the Legacy jet searches desperately for a place to land their crippled plane. Captain Joseph Lepore finds a small military base on his chart.
November 600, X-ray Lima, we have an emergency.
State your emergency.
November 600, X-ray Lima, declaring an emergency. We need to land at Sierra Bravo Charlie Charlie. Is that your airport?
Affirmative.
Do you know how long your runway is?
2600 meters.
Stand by. 2600, that's good, right? 8,000 feet? Okay, we're coming in. We're declaring an emergency. This is November 600, X-ray Lima. Did you see something? Something hit us.
2,600 meters is more than long enough to land a Legacy, but the crew doesn't know how the plane will respond when it touches down.
The canopy of green, there was a slash of brown, 2 miles away. I heard Joe say, "There's an airport."
Sierra Bravo, we see you. We're coming in.
Finding an airport was a stroke of luck, but the crew's troubles are far from over. Now they have to get the damaged jet safely on the ground. Palladino and Lepore can't configure their plane for a routine landing.
Hold it. Let's dump the flaps at the top of the flare, right? So give me 9 on the flare.
9.
Extending flaps increases the size of the wing. Since a bigger wing can generate more lift, pilots can slow down to land.
You good?
Yeah, I'm good.
With all the damage they've sustained, the crew doesn't want to put too much pressure on their wing. They won't be able to extend their flaps until the last moment. They'll have to land faster than usual.
Everyone sit down back there.
When you land under those sort of circumstances, you're landing faster than you normally would. And you get a real appreciation of just how fast an airplane is actually moving, because you're coming down like gangbusters. I see these trees now, at ground level, just sort of, it looked almost like a movie with one of those moving backgrounds. And I'm thinking, I hope this runway doesn't run out.
You got it.
Palladino hits the brakes hard.
Good. Good. You got it. Hold it.
Then finally the plane begins to slow.
Woo! Good job. Oh, man.
And then finally, we just did come to a halt. There's that beautiful silence that occurs when the engines are shut down and everything was just quiet again.
For more than 25 minutes, the business jet had flown with part of its wing torn off. There's also damage to the plane's tail. Somehow, high over the rainforest, something tore into the plane. The bizarre day takes another strange twist. Because they've landed at a military base, soldiers confiscate the passports of everyone on board.
And that's the point at which I realized that we were in custody. I don't think the others on the airplane had the immediate sense that this was a custodial situation.
Along with the 2 pilots, the jet's passengers are taken to the nearby airbase.
Range altitude 3200.
The emergency on board the Legacy jet has thrown Brasilia ACC into turmoil. But it's not the only problem controllers there are facing.
Takeoff.
Another plane they're expecting to see hasn't shown up. Goal Flight 1907 should be on radar in Brasilia. The missing flight is a Boeing 737 with 154 people on board. It's been in the air for 2 hours and should be nearing Brasilia. But controllers there can't find any trace of that plane.
Manaus, there isn't any gold. There isn't any gold with us here.
It's on its way.
They check its status with controllers in Manaus, who were last in contact with the plane.
Anxiety was high, and controllers were confused about what to say. They didn't know what was happening.
Deep in the Amazon, those who were on the XL Air jet are also struggling to figure out what happened.
We hit something, man. That's all I know.
Maybe it was a condor.
Are you kidding? It was 37,000 feet.
Well, maybe it was a military jet.
No, I think the plane must have exploded and we flew through the debris field. There would have been more impact.
As they're trying to piece together the day's strange events, the group gets some shocking news. A Goal flight has crashed. It's the plane that's been missing.
I just heard the 737 went down in the Amazon right where we were.
It was like a thunderclap. The world changed immediately. And Joe and Jan were just stricken. I don't think I've ever seen 2 more anguished men in my life.
The Goal flight crashed right where the Legacy lost a piece of its wing. It can't be a coincidence. Approximately 100 kilometers from the military base, the wreckage of Gol Flight 1907 has been found.
The greatest difficulty involved the fact that the plane fell straight down. When it hit the ground, the trees covered it up, making it hard to get to.
The shattered remains of the plane litter the jungle floor. The news hits controllers in Brasilia extremely hard.
They had just realized that the worst thing that could happen in air control happened. People were crying. A lot of people had to be dragged out of the room. Things were not under control in the room.
Over the next several days, troops pour over the scene of the Gol crash. The dense jungle slows their progress.
To walk about 1 kilometer in the forest took us about an hour.
A makeshift helicopter landing pad is carved out of the jungle. It's becoming increasingly clear that no one has survived. 154 people are killed. At the time, it's the worst crash in the history of Brazilian aviation. What had happened in the skies above the Amazon? Investigators face a mammoth job. Colonel Rufino Ferreira is in charge of the investigation into the Gol crash.
An investigator always has to keep an open mind. You can't start with any preconceived ideas. When we arrived at the location of the accident, the only thing we knew for sure was that we had found the plane that was missing.
The wreckage of the Gol jet is spread over more than 2 kilometers. The widespread debris tells investigators that the plane ripped apart before crashing to the ground.
The aircraft disintegrated during the fall. It hit the ground in pieces. There was practically no damage caused by the impact with the ground. The plane had already fallen apart.
On October the 2nd, just 3 days after the crash, the plane's flight data recorder is found. Most of the cockpit voice recorder is also recovered, except for one critical part.
In this accident, the impact was so strong that the module separated from the recorder.
Modern voice recorders don't use tape. Conversations are recorded digitally onto a memory module. But that part of the Gol CVR has broken free. Without it, the rest of the cockpit voice recorder is useless. While the search for the module continues, Ferreira looks at the information from the 737's flight data recorder. He learns that the plane was flying at 37,000 feet. It was on course and flying level at its assigned altitude. Then, without warning, the plane pitched over and plummeted toward the ground. Whatever happened, it was sudden and catastrophic. The data recorder tells Ferreira that the plane spun 11 times before it hit the ground.
Klaus, I can't see Gol. There isn't any Gol with us here.
It's on its way.
So it's already in my area?
For over half an hour.
Police investigators want to know what air traffic controllers can tell them about Gol Flight 1907's final minutes.
There was no Mayday. In fact, we never had contact with the Gol jet.
Controllers say there was no warning that the jet was in trouble. It simply vanished. Colonel Ferreira studies air traffic control data from the day of the accident. There is no sign of the Gol flight. But the readings from the smaller Legacy jet capture his attention. It seems to be flying erratically. Instead of keeping to a single altitude, the radar shows it flying up and down dangerously. Perhaps the private jet pilots were testing out their new plane by climbing and descending quickly. They may have collided with the Gold jet as a result of their reckless flying. When that information leaks out to the country's newspapers, it makes front-page news.
The population thought it was unjust that a smaller aircraft was able to make an emergency landing while the larger aircraft with 154 people just fell into the Amazon and everyone died.
Neither Lepore nor Palladino are officially charged, but they are confined to a hotel room in Brazil while the investigation continues. Ferreira interviews the two pilots about what they did and what they saw.
Look, we were proceeding northwest on course to Manaus at 37,000 feet. Okay, we were attempting to contact Brazilian control.
Were you changing altitude?
No.
I was on the plane. Had the plane been flying erratically or doing loop-de-loops or whatever it was, I think I would have had a pretty good story for the New York Times.
Did you say you were flying at 37,000 feet?
Yes, that's right. Flight level 370. We never moved from that.
When he reviews the information from the Legacy's flight data recorder, Ferreira confirms the pilot's story. Although the ground radar shows the Legacy flying wildly, the data from the plane shows that it didn't change altitude at all. But there is something shocking about the Legacy's path. The business jet was flying north to Manaus, the Gold flight south from Manaus. Ferreira can see that both planes were flying at the same altitude, 37,000 feet. He makes a horrifying discovery. For some reason, the two planes were on a collision course. Air traffic is typically routed along specific corridors through the sky, essentially highways in the air. But planes traveling in opposite directions are supposed to be separated by at least 1,000 feet.
The airway system, for instance, between Brasilia and Manaus is very simple. It makes airplanes fly northbound, maintaining even levels, and airplanes flying southbound, maintaining odd levels.
But somehow, the Legacy jet and the Gol 737 were traveling down the same aerial highway in opposite directions. For long minutes, they were heading straight for each other. It seems more and more likely that the two planes collided. At the crash site, workers find support for this incredible theory. The left wing of the Gol flight is recovered. Investigators discover that about halfway along the wing, it's sliced clean through. None of the other wreckage is sliced this way. The precise nature of the cut tells Ferreira that this is not damage that was caused by impact with the ground.
The damage on the left wing clearly shows that it was caused by a collision with another plane.
The badly damaged wing would have sent the 737 into a spiral dive. The pilots would have had no way of controlling it. The sudden spiral motion would have pulled the plane apart. It's the reason the wreckage is spread over such a wide area. Ferreira finds the most conclusive evidence of a collision on the Legacy's damaged wing.
On the Legacy, we found very small traces of paint that came from the Gold wing.
Together, the planes had a combined speed of 1,600 kilometers an hour. At that speed, the wingtip of the small jet easily sliced through the 737. Colonel Ferreira now understands what caused the Gold jet to crash, but he doesn't know why. How had the two jets ended up in the exact same airspace without anybody noticing? Investigators in Brazil now realize that they are dealing with something very unusual.
A mid-air collision is a very rare event in aviation, and it should not have happened with two very modern new aircrafts.
The situation becomes more complicated when investigators study a critical document, the Legacy's flight plan.
Flight plans are filed by using a standard form which is the same all over the world. The form will contain the flight number as well as requested flight level or altitude.
According to this document, when it collided with the Gold flight, the executive jet wasn't expected to be at 37,000 feet. The Legacy's flight plan called for the jet to fly at 37,000 feet only until it reached Brasilia, then descend to 36,000. But the collision took place 850 kilometers northwest of Brasilia, well past the point where the Legacy was supposed to descend. So why hadn't the Legacy followed its flight plan?
The flight plan calls for you to descend to 360 at Brasilia. Why didn't you?
We weren't told to. Before we took off, we were cleared for 370 all the way to Manaus. That's what we did, sir. I don't know where you're getting the information from. Yeah, we followed the rules.
We were not told to descend, and we did not descend.
Colonel Ferreira needs to check the story that the crew is telling. He wants to know exactly what they were told by controllers when they took off from São José dos Campos.
November 600 X-ray Lima, ATC permission for Manaus, flight level 370.
The Legacy's last instruction was to fly all the way to Manaus at 37,000 feet. The pilots obeyed that instruction even though it differed from their flight plan.
Air traffic control always can deviate from the flight plan because they have best knowledge of the actual traffic situation.
Leaving Manaus, the Gold jet was also cleared to fly at 37,000 feet. Both planes were assigned the same altitude by controllers at opposite ends of the country.
Once we were certain that both planes were flying at the same altitude, we knew for sure there would be a lot to investigate on the side of air traffic control.
Ferreira turns his attention to conversations between controllers in Brasilia and the Legacy jet. The cockpit voice recorder from the Legacy gives investigators a remarkably detailed look into what happened on the private jet. The brand new Legacy jet has a state-of-the-art recorder that captures 2 hours of conversation.
The CVR was probably the most important component in the investigation.
November 600 X-ray.
At 10 minutes to 4, the crew is told to change radio frequencies and get in touch with the controller monitoring their flight.
Change frequency to 125050.
Decimal 1, I'm sorry, 12505, good day.
Good day.
At this point, the Legacy jet is approaching Brasilia, but the crew never receives any instructions regarding their altitude.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima, level 370, good afternoon.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
When the Legacy overflew Brasilia at flight level 370, according to the flight plan, it should have been descending to 360, but air traffic controllers simply forgot to give the order to the Legacy to descend to 360.
The pilots would have assumed they were meant to stay at 370, 37,000 feet.
No airplane should ever change altitudes without receiving instructions from air traffic control.
To discover why controllers didn't give that crucial instruction, Colonel Ferreira takes a closer look at the technology used to monitor the traffic over Brazil.
So, can you call up the Legacy jet screen for us?
Na tela radar, nós recebemos a informação.
On the radar screen, we see the altitude, speed, and the transponder information of each plane.
Nós chamamos que é o código transponder da aeronave para a identificação de cada aeronave.
Each flight has an individual code assigned to it that helps controllers track it. Underneath that, there are two separate numbers. On the left, the plane's actual altitude. On the right, the altitude the plane is supposed to be at according to its flight plan.
So here, the number changes to 360.
As the Legacy jet passed over Brasilia, the number on the right, the planned altitude, changed. The computerized system automatically updated it. According to the flight plan, at this point, the plane was supposed to descend to 36,000 feet, 360.
To my knowledge, only Brazilian air traffic control system is using this kind of design. In other parts of the world, this update has to be done manually.
The computer changed a single number, which led to a critical error. Without much experience with the computerized system, the controller mistook the new planned altitude for the plane's actual altitude.
Só que o sistema mudou automaticamente, mudando o nível autorizado para...
The system changed it automatically from the authorized altitude to the planned altitude, which made the controller believe the Legacy was flying at 360.
Quando o outro controlador veio assumir o serviço, ele passou para ele o nível que estava no plano de voo 360.
Police investigators talk with the controller who was on duty when the number changed on the screen.
It was shortly after that I went on break. Lucivando relieved me.
He tells police about a critical mistake on his part.
You have 5 aircraft. The Legacy is at 360.
Before leaving, he handed his flights off to another controller, telling him where he thought the Legacy was flying.
I believe it was at 360, and that's what I told you.
When the new controller took over, the one being relieved gave him the Legacy's altitude information according to the flight plan, 360.
But the jet was actually flying 1,000 feet higher, right in the path of the goal flight. Colonel Ferreira studies transcripts of conversations on board the Legacy and finds that the crew was having their own difficulties during the flight.
How much longer, guys? That's a good question, Ralph.
The crew seems unfamiliar with some of the jet's advanced systems.
Still working out the kinks on how to work this flight management system. Where's the one that gives us total time?
My impression is that the pilots were trying to learn their aircraft systems during the flight.
Investigators also uncover a breakdown in communications.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima, flight level 370, good afternoon.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
After a brief conversation between the Legacy jet and Brasilia ACC, Colonel Ferreira notices something extremely unusual. For almost an hour, the Legacy pilots don't talk to anyone on the ground.
They stayed 57 minutes without attempting any contact with air traffic control, which seems like a lot of time. After 57 minutes, they tried to call 12 times without success.
Realizaram inicialmente 12 tentativas de chamada, sem sucesso.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
Palladino did try to get hold of ground control, but he couldn't get through.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
He then tried the backup frequencies listed on his navigation charts.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
November 600 X-ray Lima.
His only contact, a single garbled message.
6 smoke 5.
Sorry, say frequency one more time for November 600 X-ray Lima.
Both pilots and air traffic controller should have been more concerned of maintaining two-way contact all the time. This is their duty.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray Lima.
Had pilots and controllers spoken, they might have discovered that the Legacy was flying north in a corridor reserved for southbound traffic. As the public learns about the mistakes in the Air Traffic Control Center, there is growing pressure to make some changes.
We wanted to understand what had happened to these people inside the control room. The controllers should have been able to see on their radar screens that these two airplanes were flying in a collision course.
Brazilian air traffic control is one of the last in the world to be run largely by the country's military.
Since they're run by the military, they're run by the Brazilian Air Force, we did not have complete access to information except for what was released.
As fingers are pointed at controllers, many of them come forward with stories of overwork and poor training.
They complained that they weren't well trained in English language, which is the international aviation language. Also, they had complaints about their equipment.
In fact, the controller who incorrectly reported the Legacy's altitude had been on the job for only a year. A valuable piece of the puzzle is still missing. Investigators still don't know what happened during the final minutes of the GOL flight. Soldiers have been scouring the Amazon jungle with metal detectors looking for the plane's missing memory module. Almost a month after the crash, they find it. Colonel Ferreira hopes to hear some reason why the GOL crew wasn't able to avoid colliding with an oncoming jet.
GOL 1907. Contact Brasilia. ACC on 125.2. A good flight.
Thanks very much, Brasilia 12.2. GOL 1907.
There are no alarms before the collision. No warning that they were flying straight for another jet. Pilots rely on air traffic controllers to keep other planes out of their path. They spend much of their time monitoring their instruments, not the skies ahead. At the speed they're traveling, they'd only have to look away for a few seconds to miss an approaching plane.
There were no issues of communication and no misunderstanding between the pilots and air traffic control. They had no idea what had just happened to their plane and fought until the end to regain control.
For less than a minute, the pilots struggle for control, but there's nothing they can do. But why were there no warnings? Both planes were equipped with a safety feature designed to prevent exactly this type of accident. Ferreira now needs to know why that system failed. Earlier in the investigation, strange radar images suggested that the Legacy pilots were flying wildly over the Amazon. Now those suspicions have vanished, but Ferreira revisits the fluctuating radar data to understand why neither plane knew the other was coming.
You see, the altitude is varying significantly.
To try to understand this last piece of the puzzle, Colonel Ferreira returns to the radar display that air traffic controllers saw the day of the crash. Instead of displaying just the expected altitude and the actual altitude, the letter Z appears between them.
The Z on the air traffic controller screens indicates that the airplane he's looking at has lost its transponder.
Modern commercial aircraft are equipped with transponders. Like small radio stations, they broadcast information on the plane's altitude and flight number. This information is received by computers on the ground and instantly displayed on the screens of air traffic controllers. In Brasilia, if the transponder fails, so-called primary radar takes over automatically. Signals are sent out from the ground that hit the target and return. Those readings are wildly inaccurate.
Primary radar only is a passive indication of anything that is flying through the airspace. The difference of the actual altitude in the primary radar system might differ several thousand feet.
The inaccuracy of the radar tracking the Legacy jet explains why its altitude appeared to be rising and falling. Investigators discover that the transponder wasn't sending out signals for more than 50 minutes before the crash. but controllers didn't notify the pilots. That may be because they didn't notice the subtle change.
A forma como é apresentado para o controlador não é...
The way in which the information is displayed to the controller does not visually alert him to the change. There are no flashing lights that would tell the controller that the plane has lost its transponder.
Chamasse realmente a atenção do controlador para que, aquele momento, aquela aeronave perdeu.
There's an even more critical role played by the transponder. It doesn't just beam information to controllers on the ground, but to other planes as well. All commercial aircraft are equipped with a warning system called TCAS, the Traffic Collision Avoidance System.
TCAS gives a relative position of other airplanes within range of your own airplane.
TCAS picks up a signal from an oncoming plane's transponder and issues a warning if it's too close. If either plane's transponder is off, the system won't work.
What the hell is that?
Ferreira discovers that the Legacy's transponder was working early in the flight and after the collision. But for more than 50 critical minutes, it was silent. How had a state-of-the-art jet, just off the factory floor, developed problems with its transponder?
Parada de funcionamento de transmissão do transponder.
The failure of the transponder certainly contributed to this accident.
Para a ocorrência do acidente. E nós tínhamos...
And we had to find out what caused it to fail.
O que causou essa interrupção no funcionamento?
Investigators examine the Legacy jet's transponder unit. They discover that the system which controls it had a troubled history. It had been installed on a different plane, but removed because it wasn't working. It was repaired and then placed on the jet that was sold to XLR. Investigators have the system tested. But even with its suspicious past, after the crash they can find no obvious problems with the plane's transponder.
Now this is the layout now on the standard one in the Legacy jet.
Colonel Ferreira does notice something potentially dangerous about the design of the Legacy's cockpit. If a pilot uses the built-in footrest during flight, his toes can come in contact with the buttons on the transponder.
Here, show me what it looks like in standby mode.
And when the transponder does go into standby, it would be difficult for a pilot to notice.
There's no alarm?
A small yellow warning light is the only indication that the transponder isn't on.
It was not easy for the pilots to detect that because it's not hooked up with the central warning and alert system.
But the pilots of the Legacy jet do not remember using the plane's footrest.
Still working out the kinks on how to work this flight management system. Time.
Investigators suspect that one of the pilots may have turned the transponder off by mistake.
No momento, o cenário provável.
The most probable scenario is that, by accident, one of the pilots temporarily turned off the equipment as he tried to familiarize himself with the technology on board.
Com os equipamentos de bordo.
However, the transponder went off. At a critical moment, the crew had no last-ditch safety system to warn them that they were flying right at a 737. Even though the TCAS system on the GOL plane was working, there was no signal from the approaching jet for it to receive. Closing in on each other at 1,600 kilometers an hour, the pilots never saw each other coming. Brazil's air traffic control system would undergo some radical changes as a result of the collision. But those changes would not come without a fight. The investigation into the crash of GOL Flight 1907 has uncovered dangerous problems with Brazil's air traffic control system.
Brasilia, November 600 X-ray, Lima, level 370, good afternoon.
Two planes were assigned to fly at the same altitude in the same airspace.
Radar surveillance.
Overworked and inexperienced controllers in Brasilia neglected to instruct the Legacy jet to descend to 36,000 feet.
You have 5 aircraft. The Legacy is at 367.
Then they mistook the Legacy's planned altitude for its actual altitude. To make matters worse, the Legacy pilots, unfamiliar with Brazilian airspace, were unable to make contact with controllers on the ground. And somehow the transponder, which broadcasts their location in the sky, went silent, which controllers in Brasilia failed to notice.
Keep calm. Keep calm.
A multi-billion-dollar ATC system designed to keep planes apart had failed to detect 2 planes on a collision course.
Uma série de erros, de falhas humanas ocorreram e onde as defesas.
One by one, a series of human errors occurred, and all of the defense systems that exist to avoid these errors were defeated.
Esses erros foram sendo uma a uma vencidas.
A month after the crash of the Gol passenger plane, controllers begin a Work to Rule campaign. They want to draw attention to problems with the system.
Once they did start working to the rules and not stretching them anymore, this triggered what we called the aviation crisis in Brazil. At a certain point, maybe 40% of flights in all of Brazil had over an hour delays.
Following the crash and the work slowdown, changes start being made.
There has been a lot of changes in Brazilian aviation after the accident, specifically with regards to air traffic control. The Air Force had to admit that they had a shortage of controllers, and also there's a higher degree of accountability.
In the United States, the Federal Aviation Administration issues 2 recommendations as a result of the tragedy. Pilots flying Legacy jets are warned of the possibility that putting their feet up in the cockpit could accidentally turn off the transponder. And manufacturers are told that an alarm should sound if the TCAS system shuts off. The controllers who were involved in the crash are charged with varying degrees of manslaughter. But those criminal charges worry people who were closely involved with the disaster.
Trabalhar uma investigação com fins de prevenção, quando existe uma
An investigation like ours, which focuses on prevention, suffers huge setbacks when there is pressure to lay charges.
emoção muito grande por ter sido o maior acidente.
By blaming people, we might be creating a culture where people will not come forth and be honest about failures and mistakes. And when we try to hide that, things get swept under the carpet, and soon enough they'll come out again.
Nenhum controlador sai de casa hoje.
No controller leaves his home in the morning thinking he's going to crash a plane. And so the criminalization only interferes with investigations that can prevent further accidents.
Pode vir a evitar novos acidentes.
More than 2 months after the crash, the crew of the Legacy jet is finally allowed to return to the United States.
Joe and Jan barely got out of the country. There was an attempt to hold them under what I thought was a cobbled together initial criminal charge of, quote, failing to ensure the safety of Brazilian skies.
While we are all grateful for the safe return of Joe and Jan and everyone aboard the Legacy, we are all saddened by this tragedy which took many innocent lives.
More than a year after the accident, the Legacy jet that survived a mid-air collision was still at the airfield in the Amazon. Its maiden voyage cut short by a tragic series of technological and human errors.
Where's Adam direct to? My God, he's flying north.
A Boeing 737 is badly off course.
574, confirm our position, please.
The crew struggles to get the plane back on track.
This is crazy.
They're lost in a violent storm when their plane starts rolling over.
Pull up! Pull up!
The lives of 102 people are at risk.
Adam 574, Yujong control.
Then, mysteriously, Adam Air Flight 574 disappears without a trace. January the 1st, 2007, Surabaya, Indonesia. It's New Year's Day. There are celebrations throughout the country. Surabaya's airport is bustling. And not just because of the holidays. Indonesia is experiencing a boom of budget airlines. Many people are taking advantage of the cheaper fares.
For the average Indonesian, it meant that the explosion of low-cost carriers made it much more possible to actually get on a plane and fly.
One of those new airlines is Adam Air.
Good afternoon, departure. This is Adam 574.
Adam 574, this is ground control. Go ahead.
Adam Air was successful because it provided a fresh image to the industry. I mean, they came in with, bright colors. Their airplanes were painted in fantastic orange. The crew was in a flashy uniform. They had everything right going for them.
Captain Refri Widodo has been flying with Adam Air for 6 months. Today, he's in command of Flight 574, a short domestic flight. His co-pilot, Yoga Susanto, has been with the airline for almost a year and a half. Before the discount travel boom, many passengers wouldn't have been able to afford this flight.
More and more people were able to fly, could afford the tickets, and they didn't care too much about the services offered simply because they just were intent on getting from point A to point B as cheaply as possible.
There are 96 passengers and 6 crew members on today's flight. Controllers at the airport are busy juggling planes.
Okay, the 574 is clear for takeoff.
80 knots. Check. V1. Rotate.
Today's flight is a routine 2-hour hop. From Surabaya on the island of Java to Manado on the island of Sulawesi, almost 1,700 kilometers northeast. It's the beginning of the rainy season. Weather is unpredictable. Forecasters are expecting fierce storms. Captain Widodo is aware that there may be bad weather ahead.
Turn right direct to Fando and climb to flight level 330.
Roger, turn right direct to Fando and climb to flight level 330, Adam 574.
Minutes after takeoff, the crew turns on the autopilot. The flight computer will fly the plane and navigate it along a pre-planned route to Manado.
now passing flight level 220, climbing to flight level 330.
Roger, Adam 574, track direct to Diola.
Confirmed. Tracking direct to Diola, Adam 574.
22,000 feet below, air traffic controllers track the flight's progress on radar and confirm that it's on course. The plane is beginning to experience some turbulence. Less than half an hour into the flight, air traffic controllers notice something out of the ordinary.
Where's Adam direct to? My God, he's flying north.
Flight 574 has flown off course and is now heading into a violent storm. Air traffic controllers don't know why.
Yes.
On board the plane, the pilots try to understand how far they have drifted off course.
The IRS. 28 is the difference.
And try to fix the problem with the computerized system that handles navigation.
May I have your attention? This is your captain speaking. We are about to experience some turbulence. Could all the passengers return to their seats?
Controllers on the ground try to get Flight 574 back on course, giving them directions to their next assigned waypoint called Diola.
Adam Air 574, maintain 350, direct to Diola.
Confirmed. Flight level 350, direct to Diola, Adam 574.
But to get there, Flight 574 must pass through a severe storm. 137-kilometer-an-hour winds beat on the plane's hull. It's pounded by hail and rain. The weather is making it hard to see. The crew is not just concerned with the weather. They're still also trying to understand the problem with the plane's navigation system.
This is messed up.
Getting lost over the ocean is everyone's worry, because when you lose your navigational instruments or you lose trust of your navigational instruments, what do you do?
Co-pilot Susanto consults the aircraft's handbook.
It's starting to fly like a bamboo ship.
Captain Widodo doesn't know where he is. He needs directions.
Confirm our position. Adam 574, confirm our position, please.
Roger, Adam 574, position is 125 miles. Mike, Kilo Sierra, crossing radial 307. Mike, Kilo Sierra.
The weather in Mike Kilo Sierra isn't good.
The storm is growing worse.
This is crazy. We're going to get lost if it stays like this.
Captain Widodo wants to take over navigation of the plane from the flight computer.
Okay, put the IRS in attitude.
But suddenly, a warning. The autopilot has disengaged completely. Then many of Susanto's computerized instruments go blank. The crew doesn't notice that their plane is rolling over. Flight 574 is banking at a dangerous angle.
Okay, enter this.
Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle.
If it rolls too far over, it could send the plane and the 102 people on board into a fatal downward spiral.
Okay, put it back on nav again. Put it back on nav again. Put it on nav again.
Captain Widodo wants to re-engage the flight computer's navigation system. The plane is still rolling, and now its nose has started to point downward. Another alarm tells the pilots that they are entering a steep descent.
Don't turn it! This is a heading! Pull out!
Adam 574, Yujung Control. Adam 574, Yujung Control. Adam 574, radar service terminated. Please contact Yujung Control at 128.1.
Inexplicably, Flight 574 has disappeared. News of Adam Air Flight 574's disappearance spreads quickly. The Indonesian government starts mobilizing search and rescue teams to find it. First Air Marshal Edi Suyanto will coordinate the search and rescue.
Pada tanggal 1 Januari 2007.
On the 1st of January 2007, I received a verbal notification from the Vice Assistant Operation Head of Air Force that Adam Air had not landed in Manado.
Belum mendarat di Manado.
Indonesia's National Transportation Safety Committee, or NTSC, is also notified. The NTSC is responsible for finding out what went wrong in any plane crash. Franz Wieners is in charge of investigating Adam Air 574.
The first steps that we take when there was an accident or serious incident, we will find all the resources that we have and get the team together before we dispatch to the area.
Working with air traffic control, the searchers try to pinpoint the last recorded location of Flight 574.
Mendapatkan laporan juga bahwa
I received the report that Adam Air was lost from the radar in the Majin Sea.
Laut Majeni.
The plane was last detected by radar as it was crossing the sea, about halfway through its intended journey.
Okay, so right around here.
But the plane could have flown hundreds of kilometers after that signal was received. It's impossible to pinpoint the exact location.
When the aircraft went missing, it was a bit of a shock for everybody because in this day and age, nobody expects an aircraft to go missing.
Without a specific location, searchers try to figure out how large an area to scan. Since they know how much fuel was on board, investigators can calculate how far the plane could have flown since it was last detected.
If this is their last radar hit, they didn't have enough fuel to fly any further than this.
More than 3,000 people are sent out to look for the plane. The Indonesians are joined by a US Navy vessel. But the area they have to search is the size of Ireland. The teams don't even know whether to look on land or on water.
And as long as there was no definitive word, hope remained.
12 hours pass without any confirmed sightings. And then friends and relatives' hopes are raised with news that survivors have been found.
A new report came in saying that they had found the Adam Air wreckage in the mountainous area of Polowali, with 100 victims and 12 survivors still alive.
Rescue teams hurry to the island of Sulawesi, hoping to return survivors to their families. They also hope to discover what went wrong on board the plane.
When news broke that some people might have survived the crash, the already incredibly stressed and emotional families of the survivors thought, whoa, maybe there is a chance. Maybe my wife, cousin, husband, brother has survived.
But when the first officials get there, they find that these survivors are not from the flight at all.
So they were ferry survivors, not airplane survivors.
They're from a ship that sank in another storm near where Flight 574 is thought to have crashed. Now the rescue teams are back to square one.
It led people's hopes up. And people flocked to Makassar and they were finding ways how to get to the crash site, only to find that it's not there.
For family members, it's a bitter disappointment.
Sebetulnya kita malu.
We were ashamed because the information was already spread all over before we verified it. Our government was embarrassed that we publicized that information.
It's been a week since the crash. With each passing day, the chance of finding any survivors grows smaller.
There was still no clear picture of exactly where the plane had crashed and how it had gone down and why it had gone down.
Wieners needs to locate the wreckage as soon as possible. Most of all, he needs the 2 black boxes that record conversations in the cockpit and flight data. There are beacons attached to the boxes, but they only have a 30-day battery life. 9 days after the crash of Adam Air Flight 574, a fisherman finds what he thinks might be part of an airplane, 300 meters off the coast of Sulawesi. The piece is taken to an Indonesian Air Force base for analysis. Frans Wieners quickly identifies that it is part of a Wright elevator. He examines it to see if it belongs to Adam Air Flight 574.
We checked with the serial numbers, we checked with the part numbers.
The numbers match.
So we are definitely sure that it is from the aircraft.
The finding confirms that Flight 574 crashed at sea. The team can now narrow down its search to the area where the elevator was found. Since the accident involves an American-made plane, the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board joins the investigation. And they send structural engineer Clint Cruikshanks to Indonesia.
We started working with the NTSC to look at radar data, air traffic transmissions, weather data, trying to bring all that information together to find the airplane.
The water that investigators plan to search for wreckage is 6,500 feet deep, much too deep to send down divers.
It was quite deep water, deeper than we're normally used to recovering airplanes from.
The Indonesian government wants Adam Air to pay for the salvage operation. Investigators meet with representatives of the airline.
It is going to be expensive. We need to hire contractors to go down that far.
Adam Air felt that its responsibility only went so far. The government and most of public opinion believed that Adam Air's responsibility was actually almost total because they were the owners of the airline.
The airline refuses to pay for the salvage, triggering a lengthy negotiation. This is not good news for Frans Wieners. Unless someone puts up the money to search the seabed for wreckage, the mystery of Flight 574 will not be solved. It is also a blow to the families of the victims.
The families obviously wanted to know what had happened to their loved ones, and they did want the government and Adam Air to combine to get the flight data recorders out of the water.
As the investigation stalls, public anger grows.
People were becoming more and more critical of Adam Air and the way it was being run.
But then, after 7 months of negotiating,
This is good news. Thank you.
Adam Air agrees to help pay for the salvage. Phoenix International, an American company specializing in deep-water salvage, starts the operation on August the 24th. But the time they've lost has had a serious consequence. Although they have a fix on the location of the crash, the locator beacons attached to the black boxes have gone dead.
If the black boxes are not found, it will be a mystery until today.
Without the beacon, finding two small boxes among the wreckage will be a huge challenge. To make matters worse, Adam Air has only put up enough money for 1 week of searching.
So it was like, go out there, if you don't find anything in 7 days, you're done.
After locating debris with sonar, an unmanned remote-controlled submarine is sent down to look for the black boxes.
How are we doing?
We dove on one location first. We got to that GPS location. There was nothing there.
Pull up quadrant 3.
So we sat down and decided we'd do a grid search about that point. And so we did a very methodical search.
Okay, 3 degrees. All right. Slow, slow. We're coming up on something.
We started picking up small, lightweight pieces of airplane wreckage. Things like life vests, seat trays, light bits of metal.
Oh my God, this is it.
Investigators get their first look at the wreckage.
This plane is ripped apart.
The state of the wreckage illustrates just how violent this plane crash was.
The little pieces of wreckage didn't tell us anything about the cause of the crash. They did tell us, however, that the airplane hit the water at a very high rate of speed. This was the most fragmented airplane that I have ever seen.
Only 2 days into the operation, Cruikshank spots something.
All right, stop. Rotate back 5 degrees.
I noticed on the left side of the video screen something that appeared to be orange, and I instructed the ROV operator to take a closer look at it.
That's it? That's it. Okay.
Once we got over there, we realized that, yeah, this in fact was the FDR.
The plane's flight data recorder has been found.
All right, good work, Joe. Let's get this up.
We were very excited that we had seen and recovered one of the boxes.
Investigators soon find the cockpit voice recorder nearby.
All right, stop. That's it.
Their week is up. The salvage operation is over. Investigators now hope that they have all the clues they need to solve this accident.
The black boxes is the only source for the evidence that we have, because we don't have the wreckage, we don't have the witnesses.
But the boxes have been lying on the bottom of the sea for almost 8 months. They could be damaged beyond repair. They may not yield any information at all. The black boxes from Adam Air Flight 574 are taken to the National Transportation Safety Board in Washington, D.C. Investigators think the labs there are the best bet at salvaging any possible information.
If an FDR is found in salt water, it needs to be washed in fresh water and then contained in water the entire time until it makes it to our lab.
Salt and air together create a chemical reaction that results in rust. The rust can damage the electronic components in the recorders. Keeping them submerged in fresh water delays that reaction.
The importance of having the data depends on the circumstances of the accident. If you're able to recover wreckage in other parts to investigate, then you don't necessarily need to rely on the data. For this particular accident, since the wreckage was going to stay at the bottom of the ocean, it was essential that we had data from the recorders.
Franz Wieners also makes the trip to the United States.
The FDR and the CPR, when they were recovered from the bottom of the sea, the cases were actually 50 or 60% damage.
We thought there might be an issue in recovering the data. It wasn't as damaged as many others we've seen, so we were fairly confident if there was data recorded, we would be able to get the data off of it.
Technicians begin the painstaking process of retrieving the information. The job is a multinational effort.
The Australian Transport Safety Bureau was requested to assist. We have an excellent relationship with the NTSB folk, and so our flight recorder specialist went to the United States and worked alongside the NTSB.
The electronic components containing the data are carefully removed and dried. Then the information is uploaded onto a computer. As the delicate procedure of recovering the data from both recorders progresses, investigators are aware that they have an additional concern.
As you can tell,
one problem that we ran up against in this investigation is the maintenance records indicated that the flight data recorder was written up as being inoperable in the weeks prior to the crash. We were concerned with that in that if we found the FDR, it may not have recorded anything.
Investigators keep their fingers crossed.
we've got it all. It's all there.
I was confident once we found out that we had 100% of the data that we would be able to solve this accident.
The two black boxes provide investigators with the first solid clues about why Flight 574 fell from the sky.
Good afternoon, departure. This is Adam 574. Now passing
Flight level 220, climbing to flight level 330.
Roger, Adam 574, track direct to Diola.
Confirmed, tracking direct to
Diola, Adam 574.
The conversation in the cockpit tells investigators that the crew knew that the plane's navigation system was sending them off course.
The IRS.
28 is the difference.
They're drifting.
And that they were preoccupied with fixing that problem.
This is messed up.
Where's Adam direct to? My God, he's flying north. Adam Air 574, maintain 350, direct to Diola.
Confirmed, flight level 350, direct to Diola, Adam 574.
To get from one waypoint to the next, the flight computer always has to know the plane's exact location. That information comes from a component called the IRS, or Inertial Reference System. It tracks every adjustment to the plane's course to calculate its exact position. It then feeds that information to the autopilot.
The autopilot needs to know where the aircraft is and where it needs to go. Now, the autopilot takes those data from the IRS in terms of height, heading, and speed.
But for the system to keep track of the plane's heading, it has to know where the plane started. The IRS has to be calibrated before takeoff. Usually, the crew will enter the coordinates of the gate as the starting point for the computer to track. Investigators wonder if the IRS guided the plane off course because the wrong initial coordinates were entered.
We just got this.
They check this by looking at information from the flight data recorder.
The numbers are fine when they're on the ground.
Yes.
The data confirms the IRS was calibrated before Adam Air Flight 574 took off.
This is where it begins.
But for some reason, the IRS began to send the plane off course almost as soon as the flight got in the air.
It just gets worse and worse.
I have something else I'd like to show you. Some maintenance logs.
Cruikshanks and Weenus look at the maintenance history of the IRS system that was on board Flight 574.
As you can tell, there's more than 100 write-ups here. Look at this.
Same unit. Same problem.
That's right.
The history shows that there had been numerous complaints about the plane's navigation system over the past 3 months.
Again and again.
Investigators wonder why the airline didn't fix the problem.
In the case of the IRS of this aircraft, that unit should have been taken out and sent to maintenance for calibration or repairs.
Investigators discover that when pilots complained about a faulty IRS unit, the airline didn't fix it properly. They would either swap it with a unit from another plane, or often they would only do a basic cleaning of the malfunctioning unit.
They just pull up the connectors, spray it with some lubricant cleaners, then put it back on, did some ground test, and then just put ground test OK on the maintenance log.
Since the IRS is such a vital piece of equipment, this is contrary to all recommended repair policies. Investigators listen to the cockpit voice recorder, hoping to discover how the malfunctioning IRS contributed to the crash.
This is crazy! We're going to get lost if it stays like this.
Don't turn it! This is our heading! Pull up! Pull up!
But nothing they hear leads them to believe that an IRS malfunction alone could have caused the plane to crash.
If you have a failure in one system of the airplane, it shouldn't cause an accident.
Investigators now wonder if the severe storm Flight 574 flew into somehow played a role in this crash.
This is messed up. This is really messed up. It's starting to fly like a bamboo ship. Confirm our position.
Weather is a well-known cause of airline accidents. It can wreak havoc with the airplane and disorient pilots. In 1977, a Southern Airways DC-9 flew into a violent storm near New Hope, Georgia.
Our left engine just cut out.
Hail clogged the engines. They tore themselves apart.
Got the other engine going too. Brace for impact!
The plane slammed into the small town, and 72 people were killed. In order to determine if weather was a factor in the Adam Air crash, investigators need a more complete picture of what happened on board the flight. They want to know everything the crew did and said from the time they discovered that they were off course to the time they hit the water. To do this, they combine the data from the two black boxes to create a computer simulation of the flight.
That gave us very close to the possibility of what really happened with the aircraft.
Investigators return to Jakarta to study the simulation.
The weather in my Kilo Sierras isn't good.
This is crazy! We're going to get lost if it stays like this.
They can see that throughout most of the flight, the computer was navigating the plane. But since the flight computer was sending the plane off course, the captain decided to navigate the plane himself.
Okay, put the IRS in attitude.
Co-pilot Susanto switched the navigation system to a mode that would keep the plane flying straight and level. Captain Widodo could now change his course.
This is where they switch from nav to attitude.
Switching from one mode to the other forces some computerized gauges to temporarily go blank while they reset. One is the ADI, or Artificial Horizon, which tells the crew if the plane is flying level.
ADI goes off and stays off.
There was also another much more serious consequence to the switch.
That's where the plane starts its right roll.
The autopilot disengaged when they consciously selected from the nav mode to the attitude mode, and then the aircraft commenced an almost imperceptible roll to the right of around about 1 degree per second.
The captain missed a crucial step when he switched his flight computer from one mode to the other.
Quick reference handbook, please.
He should have flown his plane straight and level while the computer adjusted to the new setting.
Maintain straight and level, constant airspeed flight until attitude displays recover. Approximately 30 seconds. It's in the manual.
Any pilot who is trained and qualified on the Boeing 737-400 is regarded to have a sufficient knowledge that whenever they switch the nav mode to attitude, they have to maintain wings level for 30 seconds.
But neither of the pilots did that. It's an oversight with grave consequences. Without that step, the autopilot disengages completely. The flight computer did send out a warning when that happened, but the warning was ignored. The crew didn't seem to notice that the autopilot was no longer flying the plane. And it only took seconds for that to become a very serious problem. The data tells investigators that this plane had a natural tendency to roll to the right. Old planes, like old cars, don't always go straight. Throughout the flight, the autopilot compensated for that by raising the aileron on the plane's left wing. An aileron is a movable flap on the wing that controls how much the plane rolls to the left and right. But once the autopilot disengaged, it stopped compensating and the ailerons went back to a neutral position. That allowed the plane to revert to its tendency to roll to the right.
And they don't even notice.
At this point, the plane was rolling at a rate of 1 degree per second. Focused on their faulty navigation system, and with thick clouds obscuring the horizon, the pilots had no idea that their plane was dipping. It's not uncommon for pilots to get disoriented in this way.
Your body will start to fool you. Your senses will start sending you false information or false senses. You might think that you are actually going straight and level, where you're actually rolling slowly to the right or to the left.
The 737 is programmed to issue a warning when it rolls past 35 degrees.
Bank angle. Bank angle. Bank angle.
The flight data recorder shows investigators that in response to that alert, Captain Widodo did attempt to level the plane.
They get an oral warning from the airplane that says, hey, bank angle, bank angle. And at that point, they made some small inputs to the controls, but they didn't fly the airplane.
Believing that the autopilot would keep the plane level, Widodo soon turned his attention back to the problematic IRS.
When the pilot engrossed with troubleshooting of the IRS, their ability to pay attention for the other tasks is reduced. Further, these IRS anomalies has become the only priority at the moment.
Usually you would say one pilot deals with the system issue, the other pilot flies the airplane. They were both dealing with this system issue and totally focused on the issue, so they never saw what was happening.
This is not the first accident involving what we would call spatial disorientation.
It was almost 3 years earlier to the day that another flight, Flash Airlines 604, taking off over the Red Sea, had a similar fate.
See what the aircraft just did?
Distracted by a malfunctioning component in the cockpit, the captain may have become disoriented.
Autopilot! Autopilot!
Like the Adam Air flight, the captain's attention was focused on his flight computer. And like the Adam Air flight, his plane began rolling dangerously to the right. Investigators concluded that without any external references, the captain simply couldn't tell that his plane was falling from the sky.
Tragically, just because there is an inertial reference system failure, or let's say in another accident there might be an engine failure, does not mean that an aircraft has to crash.
It's 60 degrees now and there's no attempt at recovery.
Don't turn it! This is our heading! Pull out! Pull out!
Investigators can see that when Captain Widodo does take action, he makes the situation much worse. With his plane still banked drastically to the right, Captain Widodo should have leveled his wings and then pulled his nose up. He did the opposite. He began pulling back on his control column before his wings were level. That forced the plane into a tight spiral dive.
Basically, it rolled, and it just kept rolling until it almost went inverted and just kind of fell out of the sky once it got to a point where it wasn't flying like a normal airplane should.
The aircraft was descending at nearly 900 kilometres an hour, at a vertical speed at times reaching in excess of 21,000 feet per minute.
That's almost the speed of sound, and more than 150 kilometers an hour faster than this plane was designed to withstand.
It's rolling over rapid descent. They can't recover now.
At that speed, the plane is no longer able to hold itself together.
And that sound, that's the sound of the plane coming apart.
The black boxes have revealed how Flight 574 crashed. But they also raise crucial questions.
It's just one error after another.
There was ample opportunity, ample time for the pilots to correct the situation.
The investigators have come to a disturbing conclusion. The only mechanical failure was with the plane's navigation system, and that shouldn't have caused the crash. The more significant failures were human.
They put the IRS in attitude.
But why should qualified pilots make these disastrous mistakes?
Don't turn it! This is our heading!
To find these answers, investigators must look at the airline itself. This one accident will raise serious questions about Indonesia's entire aviation industry. Investigators turn their attention from the actions of the pilots on Flight 574 to the airline that employed them, Adam Air. They meet with the owners.
Franz Wings.
Adam Air was founded in 2002 by a wealthy businesswoman named Sandra Ang. Ang named the airline after her son, Adam, whom she also appointed as the company's president.
We need to know more about your training program.
The investigators interview Adam Air pilots.
Did the airline provide any training on recovery procedures in the event of an IRS failure? No.
They want to find out more about how the airline trained its flight crews.
What about recovery techniques? IRS troubleshooting? No?
What they uncover is disturbing.
We could not find any evidence that the pilot was properly trained when they have a sudden disengaging autopilot or when they're flying with the iris failure.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your time.
As they dig deeper, investigators find an airline plagued with safety issues. 11 months before the Adam Air crash, in February 2006, another Adam Air plane, Flight 782, flew off course the same way as Flight 574. That crew was also getting faulty navigation data. But they couldn't even reach controllers on the radio. They couldn't get directions. They were badly lost for 3 hours.
The crew was trying to find where they were. The ATC was trying to find where they were. And they were over the water.
Like Flight 574, they had a malfunctioning IRS. In the end, the plane landed almost 500 kilometers south of where it should have been.
They just continued until they found an island. And it had an airport in it, and they said, okay, we have to land there, otherwise we don't know where we're going to go. And they landed, and they didn't know exactly where they were until they landed.
6 months after Flight 574, the European Commission banned all Indonesian airlines from flying to Europe.
That sent a very strong message to the whole world that we, the European Union, believe that all Indonesian airlines are unsafe and you should not fly on them.
Then in March 2008, there's another accident involving Adam Air, this time in the city of Batam.
And the airplane slewed off the runway, came to rest on the side. The evacuation was a bit strange. Nose lights were deployed, and that was a final accident. And after that, I think everybody said, enough's enough, you know.
People who did care, people who were wanting to shake up the industry and reform it and improve it, were horrified that the situation had been so bad within Adam Air and that the authorities had allowed such a situation to continue and deteriorate.
Immediately after the crash in Batam, the Indonesian government suspended and then ultimately revoked Adam Air's license to operate. It is also apparent that Adam Air isn't the only Indonesian airline with problems.
Prior to the Adam Air crash, Indonesia experienced a bad crash about every year to 18 months.
Many of those accidents involved the discount carriers that the government had allowed to thrive. More than 50 such airlines were in operation at the time of the Adam Air crash.
The problem, though, was that this expansion occurred in a way that was not properly monitored, not properly regulated by the government. Thousands and thousands of people are being employed to work for airlines when they just don't have the experience to do so and are not being adequately trained, as the investigation report into the Adam Air crash demonstrated.
Indonesia's poor safety record forces the government to take steps to improve airline safety throughout the country. It begins rating airlines on safety and grounds those that don't comply. There have been fewer fatal incidents since the reforms. But a year and a half after it was put in place, the European Union's ban on Indonesian airlines was still in effect. Those familiar with Indonesian aviation think the reforms could go even further.
So that we have no more Adam Airs, we have no more companies that cut costs too much and gives all these extra risks to the public, because that's not what the public should receive. The public should receive a reliable and safe means of air transportation.
Good night now. Sundance 518, taxi across runway 24 left, contact ground point 65 when off.
February the 1st, 1991. Los Angeles International Airport, LAX.
246 heading 270, contact Los Angeles departure. Thank you, US Air 1493, you're cleared to land 24 left.
Cleared to land 24 left, 1493.
Traveling at 240 kilometers per hour, US Air Flight 1493 descends towards runway 24 left.
What the hell?
I pointed to the aircraft and yelled, "US Air is crashing." The aircraft was fully engulfed in flames.
But the full scope of this tragedy is far greater than anyone can imagine.
Mayday, Mayday.
At one of the busiest airports in the world, a Boeing 737 has just exploded in flames upon landing.
I think the thought process in the tower was, it was 1991, it was one of the first nights of the first Gulf War. And I think the thing that was foremost in our mind was maybe it was a bomb that went off on the aircraft.
As firefighters bring the blaze under control, rescuers begin searching for survivors.
About 5 minutes after the incident occurred, we got a call from an emergency vehicle.
Amid the wreckage, they have made an alarming discovery. One that forces everyone involved to re-examine every detail of the last 15 minutes. US Air Flight 1493 cruises towards Los Angeles International Airport. LAX is a central hub for international travelers.
Just confirm the visual approach for US Air 1493 is 24 left.
That's correct, US Air 1493.
For the approach, Captain Colin Shaw is managing radio communications. First Officer David Kelly is at the controls. With 89 passengers on board, the flight isn't quite full.
Well, I'd been on a business trip to Columbus, Ohio. I went from the business meetings to Columbus Airport and got on a US Air flight that was nonstop to Los Angeles. Planned a lot of good things and good times for that weekend.
US Air 1493. Expedite your descent through 4000 as much as practical, if you would. There will be traffic pass above you on the south side.
As the Boeing 737 nears Los Angeles, the approach controller tells the pilots to make a quick descent. They will need to stay clear of a flight passing above them.
Okay, I'll expedite through 4. US Air 1493.
Landing at LAX can be a challenge for pilots. The airspace around the airport is often thick with traffic. On average, a plane arrives or departs every 50 seconds. Each of its 4 runways handles both takeoffs and landings. Taxiways intersect the runways at dozens of locations. The airport can be a maze of stops and starts for pilots following instructions issued by controllers.
737, turn right 010, intercept 4A. You got the left side in sight? Yeah. We're out of 4.
US Air 1493. Thanks for your help. Contact Los Angeles Tower 133.9. Good night.
Good night.
Gear down?
All right. You gave 3 bells?
Yes, I did.
Perched 12 stories above the ground, tower controllers have a hawk's eye view of traffic coming and going from the airport.
was a busy night. There was a lot of airplanes. We had numerous arrivals and departures during that time of the night, so it was a typical day.
Elliot Brann is the clearance delivery controller.
The primary duties of the clearance delivery controller is issuing the routes of flight and the flight plans to the pilots as they come out of the computer. A flight strip is printed out, so you get a piece of paper with the call sign, type aircraft, route of flight. I issue the clearance to the pilot, and then I pass the strips, the flight information, to the next controller.
Brann shares flight information with 4 other controllers. 2 ground controllers who handle planes moving between the gates and the runways, and 2 local controllers who are responsible for planes taking off and landing. Tonight, local controller Robin Washer is overseeing the 2 north runways at LAX, 24 left and 24 right. She uses the flight strips to keep track of flights departing and arriving.
US Air 23 taxiing to position and hold runway 24 left.
Position and hold 24 left, US Air 23.
246, you still holding short of 47?
46, affirmative.
All right, you're next. Skywest 569, taxi up and hold short of runway 24 left.
Roger, hold short.
$28.75, good night now.
US Air Flight 1493 is about 13 kilometers from LAX. The pilots configure their plane for landing.
Speed brakes. Still working for a living.
All right. Flaps are going 1.
Flaps.
Now the pilots radio the LAX tower for landing instructions.
US Air 1493, inside rolling.
Wings 5006, ground, tower.
Robin Washer is busy with other planes. She doesn't respond to their radio call.
Skywest 569, taxi to position, hold runway 24 left. Traffic will cross downfield.
Okay, 24 left.
Position and hold, Skywest 569.
Wings west 5006, tower.
At 2166, connect approach 124.5.
30, green light to 10.
Gear, flaps, landing clearance remains.
Just 6 kilometers from the airport, the US Air jet still doesn't have the okay to land.
Sundance 518, taxi across runway 24 left. Contact ground 0.65 when you're off the runway. Good night.
Captain Shaw contacts the tower for the 2nd time in less than a minute. He needs Washer's permission to land.
US Air 1493 for the left side.
24 left.
246, heading 270, contact Los Angeles departure. Good night.
But she's still focused on other planes.
Out of 1,000 feet.
Flight 1493 is now 1 minute from the runway. It's what pilots call short final.
Sometimes due to other priorities that take place, an aircraft might not get a landing clearance until short final.
Thank you, US Air 1493, you're cleared to land. 24 left.
Cleared to land, 24 left, 1493.
Looks real good.
You're coming out of 500.
US Air 737 has barely touched down. It erupts in flames and crashes through Los Angeles International Airport.
I saw US Air touch down, and as he got about third way down the runway at taxiway 45, the aircraft was fully engulfed in flames. The supervisor ran past me to pick up the crash phone and alert the emergency vehicles to respond.
Aboard the flight, sheer terror.
There was a tremendous crunching sensation, and there was this extraordinary shower of sparks that shot by my window.
Good God.
Rosa Reynoso is a plainclothes officer with the airport police.
We see the aircraft engulfed in fire. My partner and I were probably about 500 yards from it.
Alert 33, runway 24 out. Affirmative, alert 33.
The initial moments were very scary, very chaotic. I remember just thinking to myself, oh God, please get some more people out here. Get me fire, get me officers, get me somebody, because this is not good.
In the tower, there's no time to dwell on what's happened. Other aircraft are still coming in to land. Controllers must direct them to safety.
Wings west 5212, winds 240 at 8. You are cleared to land. Runway 24 right. Use caution. We just had an aircraft go off the runway in flames.
The cabin of Flight 1493 is filling with toxic smoke. Some passengers rush to a door at the rear of the plane.
I probably got 7 or 8 rows down the aisle, and then I encountered a cluster of passengers standing in the aisle, not moving. I thought to myself, there must be an opening in the front of the plane that allowed for this tremendous quantity of smoke to roll into the plane so quickly. And so I stumbled forward to the cockpit area, and there was tremendous fire on both sides of the plane. I said to myself, my gosh, there's no way you're going to get out of this airplane, David. You're trapped.
Outside, some have escaped the plane. Rosa Reynoso is the first emergency responder to arrive at the scene.
The fire was intense. It was very, very hot. I mean, almost singeing us.
She needs to act fast to help passengers away from the burning wreckage.
The passengers were trying to escape the plane from the emergency exit doors. However, the fire had engulfed the doors, so some of the people that were fine jumped out of the plane and into the fire.
More emergency personnel arrive within minutes.
Most passengers are jumping out of that door.
Some people were on fire. Some of them were scratched, cut up. Some of them had broken legs. It was pretty traumatic. And I think you just start operating on knowing that you have to do the right thing and try and save these people.
David Koch is still inside.
I suddenly saw a crack of light, and my God, it was a miracle. The crack opened up, and I suddenly realized that I had opened the galley door.
But now he faces another hurdle. He can't even see the ground through the fire and smoke.
And I said to myself, what the hell, and jumped out. I landed on the ground and then started crawling on my hands and knees away from the airplane. I had a great sense of guilt. Why did I not go back into the airplane and say, follow me? And I think if I'd gone back into the cabin, I might have passed out and fallen on the floor and died. And that's how I've come to terms with the fact that I got out but didn't help anybody else out.
As the search for survivors continues, firefighters make a stunning find.
This is Rescue 1. We've got a propeller down here in the wreckage.
The discovery of a propeller has horrifying implications.
There's 2 planes down here.
As soon as we found out that information, we started actively looking to see what aircraft, if any, were missing. So we started looking at the flight strips that were already departed, and then we looked at the ones that were still pending. And then we called the departure control, radar controller to find out which ones they've talked to in the last 5-6 minutes.
What about SkyWest 5569?
No, we haven't heard from them.
SkyWest 569, taxiing to position hold, runway 24 left.
Okay, 24 left, position.
And hold, SkyWest 569.
Staff can account for all of the aircraft except for SkyWest 5569, a Fairchild Metroliner bound for Palmdale, California. Emergency personnel find parts of the smaller plane strewn across runway 24 left. There were 12 people on board the flight. None have survived. What's left of their plane is crushed between US Air 1493 and an abandoned building near the runway.
My first thought was, oh my God, there was someone else under there, and we didn't even realize it.
There's even more loss of life on board the larger plane. 20 are dead, 2 others are mortally wounded. First Officer Kelly has survived, but Captain Shaw has not. The disaster thrusts LAX into the media spotlight.
America's runways, according to the nation's pilots, the most dangerous part of the flight.
In the months and years leading up to the crash, increasing traffic was becoming a safety concern at Los Angeles International Airport.
The most close calls, Los Angeles International Airport. 33 near collisions over the last 4 years. That's 1 every month and a half.
The accident confirms safety issues need to be addressed. The National Transportation Safety Board sends its GO team to LAX to investigate.
It was kind of a horrific scene. The front end of the airplane was impaled on the captain's side against the building. And with close inspection, we could see parts of another aircraft underneath.
Investigators can see that the 2 planes collided at an intersection on runway 24 left.
The scenario of the accident resulted in 2 planes being on the runway at the same time. The runway was occupied, and that's something that should never happen when a landing clearance is granted.
Reducing collisions on U.S. runways is a priority for investigators from the NTSB.
We had runway incursions on the most wanted list from 1990 here at the Safety Board, and it's a major concern for the whole industry. A runway incursion is simply when an inappropriate object is out on a runway that's going to be used for a takeoff or landing.
Some of the world's worst airline disasters have taken place on runways. In March 1977, on the island of Tenerife, 583 people died when 2 Boeing 747s collided on the runway. In January 1990, a Beechcraft King Air 100 was struck by a Boeing 727 attempting to land in Atlanta. Later that year in Detroit, another Boeing 727 smashed straight into a DC-9 carrying 44 people.
Runway incursions occur due to some failure in the existing system. Something has happened. Some directive has not been followed. Some inattention is present in the scenario of a runway incursion.
Which one of these planes was cleared for 24 left?
Investigators need to find out why there were two planes on runway 24 left at the same time.
One of the principal objectives was to immediately see if we could find out what error had taken place that would allow that situation to occur.
Part of that answer may lie in the wreckage. But 24 hours after the crash, the investigation is at a near standstill. There's too much fuel on board the 737. Crawling through the wreckage would be dangerous.
The aircraft had about 6,000 pounds, maybe 1,000 gallons of fuel on board.
How long is this going to take?
The Saturday was spent defueling the aircraft, and that's a very slow process. That took almost all day before the fire department could declare that the scene was safe.
With airplane parts littering the airport, LAX is running at half capacity. 2 of the 4 runways are shut down. That's causing chaos for travelers. When the NTSB team finally gets access to the wreckage, they're under enormous pressure to act quickly. They must gather all the information they need so the airport can be fully reopened. Their investigation has a dual purpose. They must figure out what caused the collision. They also want to know why so many passengers got trapped and died in the burning aircraft.
We're not sure what went on. We don't have a recording of it, but there were some altercations with people trying to get ahead of other people.
Making matters worse, one of the emergency exit doors is inside the plane, partially blocking the exit.
If you follow the instructions on the card, the exit card, it will tell you to throw that exit out. This did not take place, so the right over-the-wing exit was, I would say, partially obstructed by that large hatch.
The NTSB concludes that a reduced number of exit doors made it impossible for many of the passengers to escape. With no way out, they were overcome by toxic smoke as it filled the cabin. While some investigators analyze wreckage at the crash site, others focus on air traffic control.
Well, first and foremost, we look at the communications, then we also look at the procedures within the facility and how those are applied, and were they indeed followed.
To learn more, the NTSB collects the audio tapes of the controller's communications with the planes. Investigators wonder what instructions were given to the pilots in the moments leading up to the crash. They also want to know what the flight crews were saying during those crucial seconds. Did the pilots follow their instructions? The cockpit voice recorders should provide investigators with the answer. But then Bob McIntosh gets some bad news about the SkyWest Metroliner.
No voice recorder. Great.
We recognized, looking at the onboard equipment, that SkyWest 569 did not have a CVR flight recorder installed. And that was disappointing to us.
At the time of the crash, commuter planes were not required to carry cockpit voice recorders. This means the only SkyWest conversations caught on tape are radio communications recorded in the control tower.
K24 left, position and hold, SkyWest 569.
The two cockpit crew members would have exchanged words, would have been listening to the air traffic information that was coming into their cockpit all the time, and we recognized that that was a valuable piece of data that we lost.
Using the air traffic control tapes and just one CVR, investigators try to find out which of the two aircraft in the collision was actually cleared to use runway 24 left. The answer will raise alarming questions about the safety of all passengers flying to and from LAX.
246, are you still holding short of 47?
The investigation into the deadly collision on runway 24 left focuses on Robin Washer's conversations with the two planes involved. Investigators begin with the smaller plane.
23, taxiing to position and hold.
Minutes before the accident, the pilots of the Metroliner waited for permission to take off.
SkyWest 569, taxi into position and hold runway 24 left. Traffic will be crossing downfield.
We use the tapes to try to visualize, like a local controller would, where the aircraft would be on the runway.
The pilots of the SkyWest Metroliner turned their plane onto the runway and stopped at intersection 45. They had to wait for another plane to cross the runway downfield.
Okay, 24 left, position and hold, SkyWest 569.
Okay, stop right there.
From the air traffic control tapes, the NTSB can tell that the pilots of the Metroliner followed all their instructions correctly.
All right, let's keep going.
Responsibility for the accident must lie elsewhere. Investigators probe the tapes further. They look at Washer's communications with the US Air pilots.
US Air 1493 for the left side, 24 left.
Thank you, US Air 1493. You're cleared to land 24 left.
A US Air 1493 was cleared to land on the same runway during the time that SkyWest 569 was still sitting in position on that same runway.
Cleared to land, 24 left, 1493.
SkyWest 569, right at intersection 45.
How long's it been there?
1 minute, 7 seconds.
The air traffic control tapes reveal that Robin Washer instructed both the SkyWest Metroliner and the US Air flight to use runway 24 left at the same time.
Left contact ground, 0.65 when you are.
What the hell?
When we're examining the recorded voice communications, what we try to do is to put ourselves in the position of the controller. What would she have seen? What would she have heard? What would she have done?
Investigators need to know what Robin Washer was doing at the time of the crash. They look at the other flights that she had under her control.
Wings West 5006, taxi across runway 24 left.
They learn that in the moments before the collision, Washer began to lose track of some of those flights.
Is that for Philippine 102?
No, sir, hold short. Wings West 5006, taxi across runway 24 left.
Wings West 5006 was an aircraft that was on the north side of runway 24 left who wanted to cross to the south side.
Wings West 5006, ground, tower.
And when she was ready to cross the aircraft, the crew did not respond.
Washer spent nearly a full minute of her time trying to re-establish radio contact with the flight crossing the runway.
Can I hear the rest of that exchange?
Wings
West 5006, on frequency again. Change radio. Sorry about that.
They advised her they had inadvertently been on another frequency.
5006, you're back with me.
Yeah, we didn't mean to switch radios. We're on now.
And that created a distraction for the local controller.
Okay, I thought I lost you.
Sorry, we thought we lost you. We apologize.
Not a problem.
But investigators discover that that flight wasn't the only aircraft Robin Washer was fixated on in the moments before the crash.
Tower Wings West 5072 is ready for takeoff.
Wings was 5072?
With US Air 1493 less than a minute from touchdown, Washer hears from another Wings West aircraft, Flight 5072.
When Wings West 5072 called to say that he was ready for departure, it was obvious to us that she didn't understand who this aircraft was.
Wings was 5072. Are you at 47 or full length?
We're at full length.
Okay, hold short.
Roger, holding short.
Investigators need to hear from Washer herself.
I couldn't find the flight progress strip.
They hope to learn why she didn't recognize a flight that was under her control.
I couldn't find the strip, so I asked my supervisor to help me. Francina, I need a strip for Wings West 5072.
She explains that as the pilots of the Metroliner waited on the runway for permission to take off, she was searching for another flight's progress strip. Before she could get back on track, US Air Flight 1493 crashed into the back of the Metroliner.
What the hell?
NTSB investigators now know that human error played a major role in the collision at LAX. Remarkably, when she cleared the US Air flight to land, Robin Washer simply forgot about the Metroliner waiting on the runway.
This situation that occurred is a situation that no controller wants to go through. You train your whole career for this not to happen. And when it does happen, it's you can't even describe the feelings that you go through. A situation like this could potentially happen to anybody. We are all human.
After the accident, Washer left her job at LAX and never worked as an air traffic controller again. But investigators believe there are likely more causes to this accident than one person's fatal error.
Anytime that you do an investigation, it's easy to point the blame at one individual. What you want to do is to say, why did this occur, and what can we do to prevent a reoccurrence?
Answers to those questions begin to emerge as the NTSB examines the daily routine in the control tower in the weeks before the accident.
It was one of those, you don't know you have a problem until you have a problem.
It turns out another disaster was narrowly averted 7 months before the collision. A landing DC-10 flew just over an Airbus waiting on the runway to take off at LAX.
Los Angeles Airport has always been known as one of the #1 runway incursion airports in the system, and changes were overdue.
Controllers at LAX produced documentation showing that immediately after that close call, they alerted officials that the control tower was understaffed. They also explained that regions around the northern runways were invisible to controllers because their view was blocked by a light tower.
We went up in the tower, climbed the stairs, and asked the air traffic controllers to step aside while we sat in their chairs and looked out the window. The view that the air traffic controller was presented with had an obstruction, a light pole that produced a glare, and it was a light that lit up the airport ramp.
Robin Washer may not have been able to see the SkyWest Metroliner as it sat out on the runway. NTSB investigators look at other tools she could have used to detect the forgotten plane.
The surface radar is generally used during periods of low visibility. It is a tool by which the local controller, should they so choose, be able to visually confirm on that scope that an aircraft is indeed where it says it is.
Ground radar displays all aircraft and ground vehicles moving around the airport. But on the night of the accident, that system wasn't working.
You're holding short, is that correct, sir?
Yes, ma'am, we're holding short.
It was in constant out of service, in service, out of service, in service, and gave the management a lot of trouble.
The system was not very reliable, and we did lodge complaints to have it fixed and to upgrade the system as soon as we could.
Investigators learned that just 4 days before the accident, officials at LAX had formally asked the FAA to treat the failing ground radar with the highest priority.
The radar drive and some of the drive mechanism had some ring gears and spur gears that they had to go to machine shops and literally make that part because it would wear out on a regular basis trying to rotate the antenna.
We looked into this particular problem and learned that Los Angeles had been slated to receive a new system in 1988. However, that date had slipped, and at that time, they were not sure when they were going to get a new radar system.
With the ground radar system out of commission, and with her view of the runway impeded by blinding lights, Robin Washer's chances of discovering her error were slim. Investigators turned their attention to the cockpit of the US Air flight. They wonder why the pilots didn't see the Metroliner out on the runway and abort their landing.
Well, most of us in the pilot community would recognize that it's our job to scan that runway and find aircraft that might be out there or anything else prior to landing.
Like all planes, the Metroliner is equipped with lights to make it more visible at night. There are strobe lights on the wingtips and the tail, navigation lights on the wings, and a colored anti-collision beacon on top of the vertical stabilizer.
We were concerned about the SkyWest lighting and had to look at the flight operations manual, and we found that the operating procedure for that company was to turn on the strobe lights only after clearance for takeoff.
So no other lights were required? Okay, thank you.
The Metroliner wasn't yet cleared for takeoff. So the only lights that would have been lit while it waited on the runway were the navigation lights on the wings and tail, and the anti-collision beacon on the tail. NTSB investigators then use a helicopter to put themselves in the position of the US Air pilots as they were making the approach to runway 24 left.
We went up and we actually flew that final approach in order to verify what we thought might be the condition of obscuration.
They positioned a Metroliner on the runway in the same spot where the collision occurred.
And sure enough, we could not see that aircraft parked out there at spot 45 and 47. You just couldn't see it.
Looks real good.
The investigation determines the lights on the Metroliner were the same color and brightness as the runway lights. The plane may have been all but invisible to the pilots of US Air 1493.
You're coming out of 500.
The anti-collision beacon in particular would have been lost in a sea of lights. When the National Transportation Safety Board releases its report, controller error is determined to be a cause of the runway collision.
We're in the business of determining why something happened. You may call it a cause or causes or contributing factors, but our job ends when the next accident is prevented.
Preventing accidents on the runways of LAX would prove to be a much greater challenge than investigators could imagine. The collision between US Air Flight 1493 and a SkyWest Metroliner alarms the public. The accident seems to prove that controllers cannot safely handle the increasing traffic at Los Angeles International Airport. The NTSB investigation points to Robin Washer's failure to maintain awareness of the flights under her control as one cause of the accident. But the report also points to a failing system in the air traffic control facilities at LAX. In the months and years following the accident, improvements are made to air traffic facilities in an attempt to make the airport a safer place. The failing ground radar system is finally replaced with a newer model.
Today at Los Angeles Tower, we have the newest system out there. Each arrival or departure they're taxiing on the taxiways or on the runways have a call sign and type aircraft associated with it, so you have positive identification of all aircraft at all times.
New policies governing the way flight progress strips are handled in the tower are put in place. Ground controllers now organize the strips before they make their way to the local controller. The extra set of eyes reduces the local controller's workload. 5 years after the crash, a new air traffic control tower is built at LAX. The tower is 16 stories higher, 3 times larger, and offers controllers clear, unobstructed sightlines. New regulations concerning aircraft lighting are also put in place. It becomes mandatory for pilots to turn on all their lights before they move out onto a runway. But despite the improvements, the rate of runway incursions at LAX only goes up.
Throughout the 90s and even into the 2000s, I would describe it as a common event. LAX certainly was one of the worst airports we had for a number of incursions.
10 years after the accident, more serious runway incursions were happening at LAX than at any other airport in the United States.
They had double-digit runway incursions and serious runway incursions almost every year. And in fact, in 2007, they actually had 21 runway incursions.
In an attempt to reduce the problem once and for all, the Federal Aviation Administration begins work on a new system of runway lights to keep planes apart on the ground.
Runway status light system is a series of runway entrance lighting that we put at taxiways or takeoff hold lighting that we actually put on the runway itself.
The system is fully automatic. It uses a series of red lights embedded in the runways and taxiways. The lights warn pilots if there is conflicting traffic.
The runway status lights illuminate red, tells a pilot that it is unsafe, or a vehicle driver, that it is unsafe to either cross or enter that runway. And it triggers because there is an aircraft landing or departing. There's some other traffic on the runway. The runway status light seems to be one of the most effective systems we have for preventing runway incursions, and certainly the serious runway incursions.
In April 2009, The technology was installed at Los Angeles International Airport. Prototypes of the system have also been installed at Dallas, Fort Worth, and San Diego. By 2011, runway status lights will be a key feature at dozens of airports across the United States.
The equipment we're using at Los Angeles Tower today is much better than the equipment that we used back in 1991. It's been upgraded, it's much more reliable, and it gives the controllers the tools they need to make sure that the runways are clear and to keep the aircraft moving.
Though new technology can never guarantee 100% safety, the improvements at LAX have restored public confidence in the airport, even among those who survived Flight 1493.
I spent a couple of days in intensive care at a local hospital, and I had nightmares, by the way, following my release from the hospital for quite a number of days. But I'm doing fine now. I have no problem with getting on airplanes and flying, and I've got great confidence in the airline system.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport.
To turn that off for now, sir. Thank you.
Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 is preparing to land in Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
The crew is flying a state-of-the-art Boeing 737.
Flaps 15.
Localizer alive, localizer capture.
In the final moments of the flight, the landing turns into a catastrophe. The plane falls like a rock. The crash of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 involves the most popular plane on Earth. With nearly 1.5 million passengers boarding 737s every day, investigators need to figure out if the problem was with the plane or with the pilots flying it.
Mayday, Mayday.
On the morning of February the 25th, 2009, Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 becomes the first plane to crash at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport in more than 10 years.
It smashed into the ground really hard. It made a tremendous noise.
The plane hits the ground in a muddy field just north of runway 18 right. Since the crash was so close to the airport, rescue workers arrive quickly. Most of the passengers have survived, but many are badly injured. Survivors are taken straight to local hospitals. Images of the Amsterdam accident quickly spread around the world. This is the third crash of a passenger jet in the past 6 weeks. The sudden nature of this accident adds to the mystery. It doesn't take long for the Dutch safety board to arrive at the scene. They will be investigating this accident, but they won't be alone. The crash involved an American-made plane, so the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board sends Joe Sador, one of its most experienced investigators, to Amsterdam.
When it's a non-U.S. registered aircraft that crashes overseas, such as this Turkish Airlines, we are the state of manufacture and design of the airframe, and also in this case the engines.
Fuselage in 3 large pieces, engines forward of the main wreck site.
Flight 1951 was one of the most advanced aircraft in the skies, the Boeing 737-800 series. It's designed to travel longer routes at higher altitudes.
The new generation 737 is still the best airplane Boeing ever built. We developed an airplane that had an improved wing, improved avionics, simpler systems that required less maintenance.
Investigators know this isn't just any plane. The 737 is the world's best-selling commercial jet. finding out why this one crashed is imperative. There are more than 5,000 of them in the skies. They carry about 1.5 million passengers a day. Investigators must quickly determine if there's a flaw with the plane that could cause another accident. What they know so far is that Flight 1951 had been traveling from Istanbul, Turkey, to Amsterdam. There were 128 passengers on board the early morning flight, including 4 engineers from Boeing.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our descent towards Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. Please raise your seatbacks to the upright position and stow away your tray tables.
There was no mention on board of any kind of trouble in the cockpit. The crash has killed 9 people, including 3 members of the Boeing team and the pilots in the cockpit.
See if you can get me some aerials of the crash site.
There are eerie similarities to another recent accident involving a Boeing aircraft. British Airways Flight 38.
Approximately a year before this, there had been a 777 short landing at Heathrow, which had a dual-engine flameout.
In that accident, a Boeing 777 fell to the ground short of the runway. The British Airways pilots reported that both their engines stopped delivering power just before landing. At the time of the Turkish Airways crash, the cause of that accident hasn't been found. Like in that case, investigators have plenty of clues to work with. The plane and its engines are largely intact. The flight data recorder and cockpit voice recorder are found in good condition. There are also plenty of survivors to describe what happened. According to the passengers, the landing had been routine, but then suddenly the plane simply dropped out of the sky and hit the ground. But perhaps the biggest clue comes from the crash site itself. The wreckage is not spread out. It tells investigators that the plane could not have been traveling forward at high speed when it hit the ground.
The way the aircraft had crashed, it did appear to be some sort of a landing accident in which there was moderate control of some sort.
The pattern of debris and the passenger reports point investigators to an immediate suspect: the engines.
The engines issue was a very big issue in my thought process at the time, initially.
There's no evidence of fire on the fuselage. In many crashes, fuel in the plane's tanks ignites on impact. The lack of fire raises an obvious question. Did the engines stop running because Flight 1951 had simply run out of gas?
That was one of the first thoughts that I had was, did this airplane have fuel aboard? Because otherwise, how does a 737 literally fall out of the sky on approach to an airport?
But the location and condition of the plane's engines suggest that perhaps they didn't quit in flight.
Sure looks like it was running.
When we first looked at where the engines ended up, the initial impression was that they probably were producing thrust at impact, given that they were so far forward of the main wreckage. That was just a very general conclusion.
Only the flight data recorder can tell investigators how much power the engines were generating in the seconds before the crash.
Lots of fuel. Rules that out.
It doesn't take long to discover that there was plenty of fuel in the plane's tanks. Flight 1951 definitely did not run out of gas. Passengers report that in the final seconds before the crash, the plane hit what felt like turbulence. It points investigators to a well-known culprit, a microburst. A microburst is a powerful column of air that shoots out of storm clouds. It can literally slam a low-flying plane to the ground.
If an airplane flies into that at approach speeds, you're not going to be flying anymore. You're going to come out of the sky. Certainly, it was one of the things that all of us took a look at the beginning. Was there a microburst?
In 1985, a Delta Airlines flight was caught in a microburst while landing at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The plane hit the ground short of the runway. 137 people were killed. Investigators learned that there were heavy clouds above the airport at the time of the accident. A powerful gust of wind may well have accompanied them. The flight data recorder will have recorded wind speeds outside the plane. investigators will need to analyze the flight data to prove the microburst theory. In the meantime, the rescue has led to an unusual discovery.
There was 3 pilots in the cockpit, which is unusual. This is a 2-crew cockpit. So why was that 3rd pilot there?
Since none of the 3 pilots survived the accident, it's all the more urgent for investigators to retrieve the data from the cockpit voice recorder. It records conversations in the cockpit. They're in luck.
Because of the way that the aircraft crashed, access to the recorders and the condition of the recorders was excellent.
The reason for the 3rd pilot is soon uncovered.
Flying standard arrival route, visibility 3,500 meters, expected to decrease to 2,500 meters.
For First Officer Murat Sezer, this had been a training flight of sorts. He was new to the airline and was being shown the intricacies of landing at Amsterdam's airport.
In the Jepson charts, which is what all pilots use to navigate to and from Schiphol, there's 102 pages of information on Schiphol alone. So there's dozens of approaches.
Runway 18 right has 3 high-speed exits to the left.
The captain, Hassan Arisan, was doing double duty. He was training his first officer.
Make small corrections as we get close to the runway.
And was in command of Flight 1951. It's because Captain Arisan was teaching that there was the 3rd pilot in the cockpit. Olgay Ozgur was a safety pilot. He was there to keep an eye on the flight's progress during this training mission.
The purpose of that 2nd set of eyes is to make sure that the captain and the first officer, if they're in a situation where it's a little bit of a training portion of the flight, that they don't miss something.
We got a clean recording?
The voice recorder reveals that the 3 crew members began preparations for landing when still above 8,500 feet.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250.
But the voice recorder has picked up an unusual sound, a warning that makes no sense at this stage of the flight.
One of the investigators from Boeing was a engineering pilot that came and helped with the CVR. And he's listening to see when, or are there any unusual sounds that can be heard that would not be normal.
Speed okay for ILS 18 right.
Descent 4,000, ILS 18 right.
The alarm keeps sounding. It's the landing gear configuration warning horn. Captain Arisan continually dismisses it.
Turkish 1951, descent 4,000, ILS 18 right. Landing gear.
Is that the landing gear warning? They're at 8,300 feet here.
The warning is a solid clue, but investigators can't yet see how it could possibly have caused a crash. The crew of Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 got warnings to extend their landing gear while still thousands of feet in the air.
On the initial listen, we heard a gear warning horn occur as the aircraft was approaching, when it was still up and it was coming in about 10,000 feet and below.
Investigators now turn to the flight data recorder to help solve some of the mystery surrounding this flight. The analysis of wind speeds outside the aircraft is completed. It's clear, none are drastic enough to have brought down the plane.
Evidence of a microburst.
But the flight data recorder does provide some valuable insight into the cause of the landing gear warning. One of the instruments that measures altitude had the plane already on the ground.
When we looked and saw the radio altimeter data, on the recorder it showed about 8,000 feet, and then immediately it went down to about -8. -8 feet is an indication that the aircraft's on the ground, but of course it's still at 2,000 feet.
The Boeing 737 is equipped with 2 separate altimeters. One measures air pressure to determine the plane's height above sea level. That reading is displayed prominently in the cockpit on both pilots' flight display.
10, set, sir.
The plane is also equipped with a radio altimeter. It's made up of 4 antennas. 2 transmit signals to the ground, and 2 others read the signal that bounces back to determine the plane's height.
It's precise. It's very, very precise. Pressure altimeters can sometimes be not as accurate, and radar altimeters are 100% accurate if they're working properly.
One antenna feeds the reading to the first officer's display. The other feeds the captain's instruments. In the case of Flight 1951, the captain's side was wrong most of the flight. Investigators go back over the CVR and make a puzzling discovery.
Amsterdam, Turkish 1951, descending to 7,000, speed 250. Radio altimeter.
Captain Arasan seems to have known that the landing gear warning was being caused by a faulty radio altimeter.
The airplane thought that it was low to the ground and the gear was not down. And the captain recognized that the problem was really in the radio altimeter, showing him that they should be on the ground, and he goes, it's just the radio altimeter.
Throughout much of the approach, the captain's radio altimeter had been displaying a reading of -8 feet, triggering the warning to lower the gear.
They treated it like it was a nuisance.
Turkish 1951.
Descend to 2,000.
2,000, 1951.
Investigators dig for any other abnormalities. They learn that with Flight 1951 still about 17 kilometers from the airport, controllers directed the pilots to begin their final turn to line up with the runway.
Turkish 1951, left heading
210, cleared approach.
18 right.
Left 210, cleared ILS, Turkish 1951.
210 set, sir.
This turn puts Flight 1951 in line with runway 18 right. It's equipped with an instrument landing system, which sends out a signal outlining the ideal descent path to the foot of the runway. The autopilot follows that glide path until the plane is a few hundred feet from the ground. Then the pilot takes over. It makes landing almost effortless.
The ILS is pretty easy to follow. It's a video game. My daughter has flown in a simulator and can land a 737 using the ILS.
The crew begins configuring their plane for landing, unfazed by the warning horn that's repeatedly triggered by the malfunctioning radio altimeter.
Flaps 15.
10 kilometers out, Flight 1951 picks up the ILS signal that will guide the plane to the runway.
Localizer alive. Localizer capture.
The safety pilot, Olgay Ojgur, now reminds Captain Arasan about the failed altimeter.
We have radio altimeter failure, sir.
Okay.
Turkish 1951.
Runway 18 right. Clear to land.
Clear to land, thank you.
Investigators are stumped. The crew knew about the malfunction and continued their approach. How had it then caused them to crash? Clearly, there was more to this accident than a faulty altimeter.
The whole premise of airline safety, the way we build the airplanes, the way we fly them, is based on the idea that we can have any number of failures and we should still be able to arrive safely. The radio altimeter is just one instrument. There's no way in the world that that one instrument, if it fails, should be a major cause of worry that we're going to have a crash.
Investigators wonder if the crew had been given proper guidance for their approach. They turn to exchanges between the pilots and the controller who guided them in. They carefully review every instruction.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000. Speed okay for ILS 18 right. Turkish 1951, descend to 2,000. Turkish 1951, left heading 210, cleared approach 18 right.
By following the controller's instructions, the crew made their final turn much too close to the runway.
When they intercept properly, they should be here.
International guidelines call for approaching planes to intercept the signal that guides them to the runway from below. It's so pilots don't have to make any drastic last-minute course corrections to get to it.
To intercept here, they had to descend.
But Flight 1951 was given instructions that brought it to the threshold of the glide slope while still way above it. It's a common practice at Schiphol because it gets planes to the runway faster.
Because they were so close, they had to capture the glide slope from above. Although it is an unusual situation, it is one that can be handled by a flight crew if it is managed properly.
Approaching a glide slope from above is more difficult, mostly because the crew has to suddenly slow the plane and descend rapidly to intercept the signal.
We also call this a slam dunk approach, and some pilots like it, some pilots don't. It's a little bit harder, and things happen quicker when you're above the glide path trying to intercept from above, and it's just a challenge for a lot of pilots.
The approach from above increased the crew's workload, but it's standard practice at Schiphol Airport.
I've flown into Schiphol dozens of times, and I expect it.
If the controller's instructions had somehow overtaxed this crew, their conversations would indicate it. They're just 5 kilometers from the runway.
1,000.
Check.
Flaps 40. Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
500.
All lights on.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew, take your seats.
Then, real trouble. A stall warning.
Speed, sir.
I have control.
100 knots of speed.
Arisan fought to save his plane, but just 400 feet above the ground and only 1.5 kilometers from the runway, the Boeing 737 suddenly fell straight down. It only took a few seconds for it to hit the ground.
Turkish 1951.
The recording sheds light on the final minutes of the flight. The crew was configuring their plane for landing well after it should have been done.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
Most airlines have regulations that call for a flight to be stabilized, to have all checklists completed by the time the plane hits 1,000 feet.
In instrument conditions, you're required at 1,000 feet to have basically everything done. The airplane is configured, you have slowed, you have run your before landing check, and you have received your landing clearance. And from 1,000 feet on in, you just monitor the instruments, and we're looking for the runway.
Please warn the cabin crew.
Cabin crew.
In fact, this crew was still running their checklist up to the moment the crisis hit, 460 feet above the ground.
This approach was not stabilized.
Because the aircraft was unstable, the flight crew was in a very high workload environment in the last 1,000 feet of flight.
The radio altimeter was malfunctioning. The aircraft was giving off warnings. The crew was assigned a challenging approach, and they were executing a checklist late. But none of this explains why Flight 1951 crashed.
In these type of accidents, you can never get inside the head of the pilots. And that's a very frustrating type of accident.
But the flight data recorder does provide another intriguing clue. Moments before Flight 1951 hit the ground, the plane's engines were at idle, hardly providing any power. Perhaps this accident is a repeat of the Heathrow incident.
The engines, it was interesting to note, were at idle approximately the last 2 minutes of the flight, until the very end when the thrust was increased again. That was a big red flag right there. The question is why was that the case?
But then they spot something that's very different from the accident at Heathrow.
Retard flare mode.
For some reason, while still more than 1,000 feet above the ground, the plane's computer began preparing to touch down. In retard flare mode, engine power is reduced to idle by the flight computer, and the plane's nose automatically pitches up to the flare position. Planes should only be in this configuration just before they touch the ground.
The autopilot raises the nose to break the descent. The autothrottles brings the power back to flight idle, and you touch down with the power either all the way in idle or just about to be in idle.
But Flight 1951 went into a slow, nose-up position well before touchdown, causing the plane to fly slower and slower throughout its descent. So why was Flight 1951 in landing mode? And why hadn't any of the 3 crew members noticed how slowly they were flying?
So, what else was going on when the engines went to idle?
The trouble seems to start with the malfunctioning altimeter.
We had to look at the system as a whole and see how that -8 affected the other systems on the aircraft. And that was a very big portion of this investigation. We had to say, how did the autopilot use that data? More importantly, how did the auto throttle use that data?
The computer that flies the plane consists of 2 main systems, the autopilot and the auto throttle. The auto throttle determines how much power to ask the engines for, while the autopilot controls the plane's altitude and direction. The 2 systems work independently of each other, and only one of the radio altimeters provides information to the auto throttle.
In this case, I had to learn everything there was about radio altimeters and auto throttle systems, which I didn't know before.
The pieces of the puzzle begin coming together when they find the connection between the faulty radio altimeter and engine power.
The radio altimeter provides information to the auto throttle from the captain's side.
The only altimeter feeding information to the auto throttle was the captain's, and it was wrong. It showed -8 feet throughout most of Flight 1951's approach. It's beginning to look like the faulty radio altimeter triggered the events that led to the crash. Investigators need to know what went wrong with it. On a 737, the transmitting and receiving antennas for both radio altimeters are lined up underneath the cockpit. 3 of the antennas were all but destroyed in the crash. They can't be tested. But 1 antenna from the captain's side is undamaged. Investigators consider 2 possibilities: a failure of one of the components, or some sort of interference that caused the faulty reading. The only component that survived the crash checks out. The computers that control the system also work. But investigators do make a curious discovery about them. They aren't the same ones that were installed on the plane when it was delivered to Turkish Airlines 7 years ago. This find changes the focus of the investigation.
The maintenance aspect of this accident aircraft was one that we looked at as deeply as we could.
When the plane's maintenance log is studied, investigators find that the radio altimeter on this plane had a problematic history.
We got additional data from Turkish Airlines, and that data showed that on this one aircraft, of the past, I believe, over 1,000 flights, there was about 150 flights that had faulty radio altimeter systems.
The documents show that a little more than a year before the crash, both computers were replaced because of complaints they were causing faulty readings. One of the incidents involved a radio altimeter reading of -8 feet.
So that was telling us that there was an issue that had been there. The issue did not just occur on this flight.
The faulty readings persisted. Mechanics repeatedly swapped the computers and replaced the antennas to try to solve the problem. It's determined that Turkish Airlines tried several ways to fix the altimeter, but they couldn't find a repair that worked. At the time of the accident, Turkish Airlines had a fleet of 52 Boeing 737-800 series airplanes.
on page 93.
When we reviewed the maintenance data, we found that radio altimeter problems had been written up several times on both the accident airplane and the fleet.
Investigators discover that in the year before the crash, Turkish Airlines dealt with 235 system faults with the radio altimeters on their 737s. Fixes ranged from replacing and exchanging antennas, cleaning of the systems, exchanging and replacing the computers, and installing gaskets to shield the system from possible water damage.
It's not like they weren't doing anything about it.
The Turkish Airlines maintenance personnel knew that the radio altimeter problem was one of their highest issues with regard to maintenance.
16 of those altimeter repairs were made to the plane that crashed in February 2009. If the problem was so widespread, investigators wonder why it hadn't caused serious problems before this accident. They don't have to dig too far back to find out that in fact it had, on this very same plane.
On 2 recent flights, they had the exact same problem.
Twice in the 48 hours leading up to the accident, the radio altimeter showed a negative reading, putting the plane into retard flare mode. Both times the crew noticed the problem, disengaged the auto throttles, and brought the plane in for a safe landing.
You just disconnect it and fly the airplane.
In the months after the crash, other operators come forward with similar stories. In Australia, in the Netherlands, in Canada, in Austria, pilots report their 737s going into retard flare mode when the left radio altimeter showed a faulty reading. Each of those crews reacted the same way. They disengaged the auto throttle and pushed the power back up manually. They all landed safely.
Things are going to break on an airplane, and usually you're able to identify that and take that out of, make it so that it's not a threat for the landing.
In 2008, Boeing received a whopping 2,569 reports of faulty radio altimeters on their latest 737s. But very few of those cases involved the plane going into retard flare mode.
Hardly any reports at all.
Boeing also tried but couldn't find the cause of the failures. They concluded that the radio altimeter problem was not a threat to safety because the 737 gives off enough warnings so that crews can intervene and land safely. In fact, in every instance where the radio altimeter failed, crews were able to recover. Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 seems to be the one exception. Investigators still don't know why.
It really got us wondering of what happened. And that's when we started to look really closely at the actions of the flight crews while it was on that final approach in less than 1,000 feet.
Finally, as investigators again revisit the last minutes of Flight 1951, the circumstances of the tragedy become clear. They see a remarkable sequence of events that transpire to bring down this plane.
So, what was happening when the plane went into retard flare mode?
They discover that the plane went into landing mode and pulled back power at the worst possible moment, exactly as the crew was descending to meet the glide slope.
It masked what was actually happening.
As the crew configured their plane to drop down to meet the glide slope, they expected the plane to slow down as part of that maneuver. But the plane was actually slowing down because the computer was in landing mode. That's why none of the 3 pilots said anything about the throttles moving to idle.
It was insidious. Where it first captured in the retard mode, it didn't hurt them at all because they were actually high and they were a little bit fast. And the pilots actually wanted the power back anyway. In fact, the throttles may have already been in the flight idle mode as they were trying to get down and slow down.
The trouble starts here at 8,300 feet, 13 miles out from the airport, minutes before the crash.
Amsterdam. Turkish 1951, descending 7,000, speed 250.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000. Speed okay for ILS 18, right.
Radio altimeter.
Would the crew have known that because of that radio altimeter, they would have gone to a retard flare mode in the throttles? No.
It was a common problem at the airline, but the crew couldn't see the risk it posed this flight.
We have an airplane that was malfunctioning in a very minor way, but in a way that, if not caught, could and did metastasize into something much more virulent.
Turkish 1951, descend to 2,000.
2,000, 1951.
Turkish 1951, left heading 210, cleared approach 18, right.
Left 210, cleared ILS, Turkish 1951.
Now left at 210 degrees, maintaining 2,000 feet, brings the flight in right here, 5.5 miles out. They now have to intercept the glide slope from above.
At 2,000 feet, with the glide slope below them, the pilots have to reduce their speed while descending steeply.
Speed 140.
They believe the throttles are moving back for the descent to the glide slope. In fact, the auto throttle is slowing the plane down because it's gone into landing mode. It will continue to slow the plane until it stalls.
What we found is that when the flight crew was doing their before landing checklist, each one of them was doing something while they should have been monitoring their airspeed.
For the next 100 seconds, no one notices what's happening. Until it's too late.
Established altitude set.
1,000.
Check.
Flaps 40.
Speed set.
The experienced pilot recognized that the first officer was probably a little bit behind on the approach, so he calls for flaps 40 and moves the lever, informing the first officer that he has done so. He's trying to help the first officer catch up to the position of the aircraft.
Speed brake.
Speed brake armed. Green light.
One thing at a time. Landing gear.
The plane is now 700 feet from the ground.
Gear down. 3 green.
Flaps.
Flaps 40. Green light.
In their haste to complete their checklist, none of the 3 crew members noticed the warnings that their speed is dropping dangerously. First, a red bar appeared on their flight display. Then, when the airspeed continued to drop, a flashing box appeared around their actual airspeed to draw the pilot's attention to it. At this point, no one sees either.
Cabin report confirmed.
The aircraft is now 600 feet from landing.
When things start changing colors, it's a warning to you, it's a caution to you that you're approaching the limits of the aircraft.
Missed approach. Altitude set.
500.
So all of these indications the crew has in front of them saying that the aircraft is slowing down. During that time, they were still completing their checklist.
Of course, the aircraft is getting closer to the ground.
In fact, it's less than 500 feet from touchdown.
And right before the stick shaker started, the captain told the safety pilot,
"Please warn the cabin crew."
Cabin crew, take your seats. Speed, sir.
I have control.
By the time they advanced the throttles to full power, it was unrecoverable. They were too low for the engines to catch up.
And that's it. It's now too late to save this plane. They all knew about the altimeter problem, but knowing didn't help.
Boeing also didn't foresee the potentially deadly effect of a faulty altimeter. But on February the 25th, 2009, it triggered an unusual sequence of events that brought down a jetliner and killed 9 people. The official report into the accident blames it on a convergence of circumstances.
There is never, ever just one cause to an airline accident. It simply doesn't exist. Maybe someday God will swap one out of the sky, but until then, there's never one cause.
The Dutch report also points out that Boeing could have realized the problem with the radio altimeter system could have had an impact on safety. Given that no one foresaw how that failure might cause a crash, the Turkish Airlines accident raises a big question. Are airplanes becoming too complex? Investigators have determined that Turkish Airlines Flight 1951 crashed mainly because the pilots didn't recognize the consequences of the warnings they were getting.
Turkish 1951, descend to 4,000.
This is not the first plane to crash because the crew didn't understand what their plane was telling them.
Our problem is not the automation. Our problem is the depth of the training and the ability of the human beings to recover from mistakes made in interfacing with the automation.
Mika Ensley studies the relationship between pilots and technology.
We haven't really designed the automation to take best advantage of what people do well and take away the parts that people don't do well.
In 1996, the crew of an Aero Peru 757 crashed when the pilots couldn't decipher contradictory warnings about their altitude and airspeed. The plane flew into the Pacific Ocean. 61 passengers and 9 crew members were killed. In 1995, the flight management system on a Boeing 757 could and should have steered the plane to a safe landing in Cali, Colombia. But a last-minute change to the flight plan meant the crew had to reprogram their computer. They mistakenly entered a course that took them headlong into a 9,000-foot mountain. 159 people died in the crash.
The cautionary tale here is that we can get this equipment, we can get these silicon-based units, if you will, so sophisticated that we can't talk to them effectively. And when they go berserk, or they have a problem, or we misprogram them, we end up putting ourselves and our passengers in danger while we're trying to figure it out.
NASA is working on something called the Integrated Intelligent Flight Deck. It's a project aimed at helping humans better use the technology that surrounds them in the cockpit.
They're looking at automated flight manual systems, voice recognition systems. They've developed new kinds of microphones that are bone-conducting chips. They're developing new displays for understanding the ground environment, for being able to detect where other aircraft are in the environment.
What some researchers are finding is that the best technology shouldn't replace pilots, but work with them.
Really integrating people with technology more effectively has to do with designing the displays so that you can really understand what it's doing, and you can make it simpler to understand how to make it do what it is you want it to do. You shouldn't have to push 16 buttons through 8 levels of menus to figure out what's going on with the system. It should be integrated and presented effectively. It should be as easy to communicate with as the person next to you.
Boeing and Airbus, the 2 largest manufacturers of passenger planes, take very different approaches to the relationship between humans and technology. Airbus gives the flight computer much of the decision-making power in the cockpit.
In their view, this is a way to prevent a lot of human errors by making sure the airplane doesn't do something that's going to cause a crash, even if the humans wanted to.
But Boeing has a different view. Its philosophy is to provide information to pilots and have them make decisions.
Having more information is better for the pilot, having the pilot in the loop, in the equation, so to speak. I kind of like that.
Airbus will argue vociferously and in continuous fashion that view is archaic and incorrect. I think the jury is still out.
The final report into the Turkish Airlines tragedy blames the crash of Flight 1951 partly on a failure of technology.
The erroneous radio altimeter data caused the autothrottle to go to an improper mode that is, of course, not a good situation.
The cause of the radio altimeter failure was never uncovered. The Dutch investigation asks Boeing to improve the reliability of the system.
We learned a lot about the radio altimeter system and how it affects the autothrottle system. Boeing is currently working on system improvements to prevent this type of autothrottle event from occurring again.
But the report also faults the crew for not noticing that their airspeed was dropping dangerously low, in spite of the fact that there were 3 pilots on board.
Forget that you got an autothrottle. You look at the airspeed, and you look at the altitude. You look out the damn window if you want to, but airspeed is a crucial component of staying alive in an airplane. And you always need to know what your airspeed is.
But to Mika Ensley, the crew's failure to monitor instruments is entirely understandable and may be more the fault of the instruments than the crew.
It's actually very difficult for people to be monitors of automation. One of the things that people don't do a good job of actually is monitoring. We're very good on-the-spot decision makers. We're very good at coming up with creative solutions to problems, but repetitive monitoring is the kind of thing that actually people aren't very good at all. So what we have to do is design automation to work with people in a way that keeps them more actively, cognitively involved and in the loop, and not just monitoring a piece of automation to say, is it doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Who's the ultimate computer? The pilot, the individual who should be able to say, I don't know what this thing is doing to me, but I'm punching it off and flying the airplane. Fly the jet. Probably the smartest thing we ever learned to say in our training in the airlines, fly the jet. Do that first or nothing else counts. That's what they forgot to do.